Mr. Chair, council members, and participants, you're now live.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This hearing is called to order, and I recognize the presence of a quorum of committee members of the committee in attendance who are attending are Vice Chair Brian O'Neill, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, and Councilmember Bass. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Fiscal Responsibility and Intergovernmental Cooperation. And the purpose of this public hearing today is to hear testimony on Resolution 210-269. I introduced this resolution with co-sponsors, Council Members Gilmore Richardson, Councilmember Brooks, Councilmember Jones, Councilmember Green, Councilmember Quinones Sanchez, Councilmember Parker, Councilmember Bass, Councilmember Thomas, and Councilmember Squilla. And I want to thank them all for their support on this important topic. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, city council committees are currently meeting remotely. We're using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. The clerk will now please read the title of the resolution before this committee today.
Authorizing the Committee on Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation to hold a hearing examining the use and impact of the stimulus dollars allocated for Philadelphia under President Biden's American Rescue Plan Act.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, really for being here this afternoon. We have a big agenda today, so I want to get started as quickly as possible. I have a few comments before we do get started. And before we start, I wanted to take a moment and recognize the passing of a Philadelphia icon, Ron Rubin. Our condolences to his family and friends. Ron was a champion for Philadelphia. And besides being a larger-than-life figure and a developer of the Market East and Bellevue, he was the founder of the Center City District, which became a model duplicated across the United States. He loved Philadelphia and was a tremendous mentor for many of us in showing us the example of how to give back and help the city we all love. Again, my condolences to his family and friends. We will miss him and we'll remember him. In preparation of this hearing, I was reminded of the Winston Churchill quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And while I don't think a crisis is ever good, it can force us to look at things a bit different. I know it's common to pick on government for ending up behind the eight ball on things, trailing innovation, or sometimes even blocking it for fear of change. But I think this body, especially in the last year, has responded to this pandemic with thoughtfulness about what our people need right now. And we've provided much needed leadership on major issues facing the city. This resolution is in recognition of the work and seeks to continue our strong role in determining Philadelphia's trajectory from here. On March 10th, the President of the United States enacted a $1.9 trillion stimulus package named the American Rescue Plan Act. Philadelphia stands to receive an estimated $1.4 billion in assistance in order to recover from the economic downturn brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and bring back a stronger, vibrant city with opportunities for everyone to get back on their feet again. Today, we will hear from just a subset of Philadelphia's civic and community leaders who have some interesting ideas around how we can use this short-term investment for our city's long-term gain and benefit. I thank my co-sponsors on this resolution, Council members Gilmore, Richardson, Brooks, Jones, Green, Quinones Sanchez, Parker, Bass, Thomas, and Squilla. I look forward to this hearing and hope we all use this as an opportunity to brainstorm and share ideas for this coming budget season and beyond. Thank you, and let's get started. Ms. Gerback, please call the first panel of witnesses.
Councilman, the first panel of witnesses are Michael Gleason, Harvey Rice, and Bruce Katz.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to quickly come on at the onset of the hearing to thank you for your foresight, your insight, and your leadership in ensuring that we have an opportunity to adequately review the infusion of dollars that will be coming into the city of Philadelphia, a city of the first class, not only a city, but a county, a CDBG city, to really think about how we plan for this infusion of dollars in the city of Philadelphia. And I think we have to understand that not only as we look at the American Rescue Plan, but the anticipation of the passage of the infrastructure plan, that it's important for us to have a plan from a city perspective on how that will impact us in the days ahead as we look towards our recovery and making our environment advantageous to the impending recovery. So I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I'm looking forward to this hearing and hearing back some of the feedback from all of the panels we have listed on how we can ensure we are ready for this plan. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, and thank you for supporting this, being an ally, and being here. Thank you so much. And this is an important time for us, so let's get started. I guess Mr. Gleason is first. You can state your name and go forward with your testimony.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Council Member. My name is Michael Gleason. I am a legislative manager for the National League of Cities in Washington, D.C. I'm here today to talk, as you said at the outset, about the $1.4 billion that Philadelphia stands to get from the federal government. This is a transformative amount of money that will be coming. And I think one of the things to keep in mind, and as I'll get to my slide in a second, is that this money can be spent over 5 years. So as you guys are planning your budgets, thinking about the dollars that are coming, it doesn't all have to be allocated in the first year or two. This is something that can be transformative in a way that can make Philadelphia a much better city and increase its viability over the coming years, in the coming years to come. My presentation today is really going to focus on the allowable uses, because I think that's where a lot of people are most focused on what is going to be, how this money can be used, and the best way to do so. So I'm going to pull up a slide now with the allowable uses, and now to just briefly walk through these. So the first one is to respond to the public health emergency with respect to the COVID-19, or its negative economic impacts. Basically, this is no more restrictive than the CARES Act, and you can use this for a number of ways, both for the public health emergency. So if you're interested in talking about PPE or other products for first responders, or doing assistance to households, small businesses, or nonprofits. So if the city of Philadelphia has stood up its own rental assistance, or small business grants, or assistance to nonprofits, these will be allowable uses under the money that will be coming to your city. A second is allowing municipalities to provide eligible workers with who perform essential work with money for above their usual pay, which is $13 above regular wages. The third is the reduction in revenue, and this will be based on the most recent budget prior to the fiscal pandemic. And during the question and answer session, I'd be happy to talk to you about what we've heard from Treasury about exactly what that means. But at this point, they're still seeking clarity, and we just had a call with them yesterday as they're probing city budgets and trying to understand better how budgets are used. And so we don't have an exact date of the prior to the emergency. And finally, the last use is to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband. We're going to have to wait for the Treasury to provide guidance on this one. this is one where I think there's going to be a lot of people who are interested in providing or doing investment, and it's also not linked, as the other three are, where you'll see COVID mentioned, to any necessary COVID downturn. So, for example, if you have a investment that you want to make in water, sewer, or broadband, that doesn't necessarily have to be tied to, school children not being able to access their Wi-Fi because their schools are closed. So, in summary, I'm happy to take any questions that the council may have, but it's just a brief overview of how this money may be able to be spent, and I look forward to speaking with you during this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go through all three people on the first panel, then we'll open it up for questions. I think Mr. Rice is next.
I'm going to leave it in there.
Harvey Rice, you ready to go? We're ready.
Yes. I'm sorry, Councilman.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Councilman Dom and the members of the City Council Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority. My name is Harvey Rice. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the state oversight agency for the City of Philadelphia. Thank you for allowing me to testify today on your resolution examining the use and impact of stimulus dollars allocated to the City of Philadelphia under President Biden's American Rescue Plan. First, I would like to recognize that this hearing, I believe, is a significant step into ensuring that these once-in-a-lifetime infusion of federal dollars are used in both prudent and creative ways. As you know, due to President Biden's American Rescue Plan Act, or the ARP, the city is expected to receive approximately $1.4 billion in federal funds under the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. These funds are to combat the adverse economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on city tax revenues and new costs related to the pandemic. This federal recovery aid can help the city reduce the economic consequences of the global pandemic and its negative impact not only on city tax revenues, but services. In addition, the city will be receiving direct federal funding for vaccine-related activities and testing, emergency rental assistance, housing and supportive services for homeless populations, which is estimated about $42.6 million, broadband reimbursement for libraries, airport relief, as well as direct aid to the school district, SEPTA, and other institutions of higher education. While it is not PICA's role to advise on city policy or how the city should spend its revenues, as requested, I'm here today to share some insights on this recovery funding. These federal dollars can be used to cover eligible expenditures through December 31st of 2024. And this time period covers 3.5 years of the upcoming FY22 to FY26 5-year plans. These funds will be received in 2 installments, one in May of 2021 and the second installment a year later. As such, the city should use these funds to balance both the annual operating budget and the 5-year plan. This one-time allocation of federal support should not be used to initiate new programs that are unsustainable in future years, as occurred with the school district in fiscal year 2011-12 when the ARA funding came through, which resulted in a projected $500 million deficit, due in part to the loss of federal stimulus aid. This reliance on one-time federal funding led to the largest school district deficit in recent district history. The city should ensure that these federal stimulus funds continue building on the progress it has made in recent years to not only stabilize city finances for the long term, but to continue to fund programs that address the high poverty rate in Philadelphia. These federal stimulus funds should be used to balance the budget in the long term, in addition to the projected budget gap of $450 million for fiscal year 2022. The general consensus among economists is that the economy will recover, but in a more subdued and protracted rate. Therefore, the city should ensure that these funds are used to fill potential budget gaps in the coming years. The city should, again, as we've all as PICA has always recommended in our 5-year plans, start contributing the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund. The city made its first deposit into this Rainy Day Fund in fiscal year 2020 and was almost immediately used in fiscal year 2021 to balance the city budget. Currently, the city must make a deposit in the reserve when the general fund balance for the upcoming fiscal year equals or exceeds 3% of general fund expenditures. The Rainy Day Fund will ensure that the city again has a reserve to fall back on in times of fiscal distress, as we have seen this past year. These funds should also be used to restore the critical services that may have been cut during the pandemic. Further, the city should use programs in the ARP to the best of their ability to assist struggling small businesses and also assist those who lost their businesses during the pandemic and support Philadelphia businesses in pursuing funding under the ARP Small Business Assistance and Support Funding. In doing this, we will increase our revenues, which will then assist the city budget going forward. In addition to utilizing these funds effectively, the city should make every effort to maximize the amount of federal and state stimulus funds it receives. President Biden's stimulus money should not be the end of opportunities for aid to the city. The city will also qualify for other funding from federal agencies, some of which may be funneled through the state, including programs for housing, rental assistance, the airport, and FEMA. No money should be left on the table when there will be such great and varied need for this post-pandemic aid. Prior to the pandemic, the city was experienced a significant level of tax growth not seen in many decades, while making great strides in stabilizing city finances, generating significant fund balances. Unfortunately, the impact of the pandemic on the local economy derailed the positive progress the city was making. However, through prudent fiscal practices, effective use of the ARP funds, and forward-looking budgeting, we are confident the city can get back on track towards fiscal stability. Further, the PICA board would also hope to see the city utilize these funds to address some of the recommendations the PICA board has made in the past in our reports on the 5-year plans. Thank you for allowing me to testify at this hearing, and I welcome any questions and I'm available to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next panelist on panel number 1 is Bruce Katz from the Lindy Institute at Drexel University. Bruce, please introduce yourself and please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bruce Katz. I'm Director of the Newark Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University. I will present a short deck going fairly quickly that builds directly on Michael and Harvey's testimony. It is really critical to understand the breadth and the depth of this American Rescue Plan. Next slide. So we at Drexel have put together a federal investment guide that looks at 84 programs across 19 federal agencies that are allocated by seven different distribution methods: block grants to the states, block grants to public authorities, to the city itself, competitive grants, tax incentives, capital products. So the key here is to understand how to get your arms around this and leverage it for full equitable impact in an effective way. And the focus on the flex funds or the fiscal relief funds coming directly to City Hall is only one piece of this. The government will play many different roles in the delivery of these different funds. Next slide. It is key as you pull yourself together here to set priorities. The federal government is the big investor, but at the end of the day, cities will lead by planning on how to deploy these funds in alignment with local priorities and challenges. what we have is really a big sources and uses exercise. So once you understand the available federal dollars, establish local priorities, then you can match make here, sources and uses. Next slide. Priorities or principles for these funds. This is a moment for transformation, and this is a moment for leverage, for funds to support capacity building within the government, across public authorities and agencies, with your private, civic, and nonprofit partners, so they can leverage up other funds. And the impact of the $1.4 billion that go directly could be amplified. Equity has to be baked into all of this, given the disparate impact that this pandemic has had, particularly on Black and Latino communities and Black and Latino businesses. Next slide. So let's just use small business very quickly, and all this is accessible on the Drexel website, is an example of the cross-cutting nature of the American Rescue Plan. Philadelphia, like all American cities, starts with Black, Latino, and Asian enterprises being small, low payroll, low revenue, and mostly concentrated in sectors that are low wage and low growth and were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So going forward, the need here is to think strategically about a surge in Black, Latino, and Asian entrepreneurship, particularly in sectors that can professionalize and grow at scale. Next slide. This is where sources and uses come into effect. When you think about having the maximum impact on Black and brown businesses, we need to think about an ecosystem, entrepreneurial support, access to quality capital, supplier diversity from eds, meds, corps, government, commercial corridors, and sector upgrading and sector diversification. Those are the uses. Those are the priorities coming from the ground up, with different practitioners playing different roles. And then you do this matchmaking exercise to federal sources. Yes, the funds going directly to the city, but also the state, public authorities, competitive funds, and capital products. One example, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will be getting a substantial amount of funding in state small business credit initiative funds. That can match very nicely to capital access to different forms of capital for small businesses. Next slide. One particular element here is childcare. The American Rescue Plan provides substantial funding for both the demand and supply side of childcare. And this is a sector where Black business dominates, is highly concentrated. So if these funds are distributed in a strategic way, they can help Black-owned businesses upgrade their services, professionalize, and have real growth potential. And last slide. These are the funds going to childcare. Substantial. Block grants on the demand side, a child tax credit on the demand side. But on the supply side, a child care stabilization fund, focusing on the business side of the equation. So getting your arms around not just the funds going directly to City Hall, but the funds going through multiple sources for multiple uses is the path forward to an inclusive recovery and equitable impact. With that, I'll go back to the full screen.
Bruce, is that are you finished with your testimony?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you very much. Wasn't sure. That was very, very informative. I have a few questions for everybody, so I'll start off, and if my colleagues have any questions, please just post your question in the chat room and I'll pick it up. Let me start with Michael Gleason from the National League of Cities. On the White House Intergovernmental call last week, I listened to Gene Sperling, said the administration's working diligently to create rules and regulations for the use of this funding. But the current focus is on getting feedback rather than issuing final rules. Do you have any sense when we might get more clarity about what kind of uses are eligible from the direct allocation?
Absolutely, sir. We've been talking to the White House and to Treasury directly, almost on a daily basis. On our first call with the Treasury Department, we learned that they're probably going to take all 60 days that is allowed under the statute to create the allocations as well as the rules. They're trying to make the rules as robust as possible to avoid what happened under the CARES Act, where there was 9 iterations of rolling guidance. So what they're trying to do now is use this time and be very consultative in their practice in working with organizations like the National League of Cities to get these rules right at the outset instead of having to constantly go back and readjust them later.
Okay, thank you. My next question is going to be for Harvey Rice. Harvey, after the city's annual spring economist meeting, what does it look like we'll see long-term revenue impacts from the pandemic for the city of Philadelphia?
We see, in talking to our economists who assist Pike, we see a slow but gradual increase in revenues. In some revenues, you'll see when it opens up in, say, the fall, and we see the Eagles games and the Phillies games are full capacity, then you're going to see those amusement taxes maybe shift up higher quicker than some of the other taxes. But we see a gradual increase overall in all the tax bases.
And, one of my biggest concerns is the wage tax. What is Pike's forecast on the recovery of wage taxes for the city of Philadelphia? Understanding we have about 41% of the wage taxes paid by suburbanites who work in the city.
I think we, like every other entity, are concerned about the impact that the stay-at-home and the pandemic has had on the non-resident wage, as well as the being home and not paying it. And I think as of now, we've seen about $50 million of people requesting refunds. So no one knows exactly. Obviously, it's going to have an impact, and I think it's going to have a long-term impact. We just don't know. We won't know for at least another year of how will businesses come about when when everything is opened up. And then we will see what businesses have come full back into the city, and then we'll have a better sense over the 5-year plan of what has been the total impact on the wage tax, especially the non-resident wage tax.
I think
it's a little too early to say exactly what that impact will be, but it will be an impact.
Thank you. I do think the quality of life issues are going to play a role in that too, and getting people back into the city and getting suburbanites back in also. So let me go to Bruce Katz. Bruce, that was a very informative presentation you gave. And my takeaway, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that besides the $1.4 billion the city's getting and the $1.3 the school district's getting, there's a whole other category of federal funds that we need to really focus on. And I think your presentation was like, pick 3 or 4 or 5 areas of what our focus should be. So if you were looking at the city of Philadelphia, what do you think those 3, 4, or 5 focus areas specifically, in your opinion, we should be focused on? That's number one. And number two is, has the administration have reached out to you? Have you discussed this with them? Because it was a very informative presentation you gave, and I had to think it would be very helpful to the city of Philadelphia.
Well, thank you for those questions. We have been working very closely with Mayor Kenny's staff, both the Chief Financial Officer, Mike Rashid at Commerce, and Fadulin at Planning. I mean, it's an exceptional staff. And what we've been doing across the U.S., led by Mayor Garcetti and Mayor Fisher of Louisville, is to advise cities to set up command centers so they can get their arms around both the funds that are directly coming to City Hall, but also help leverage all these other funds. So every city has a different set of priorities, frankly, but the common priorities, and the ones I think that we've been working very closely with the Philadelphia Equity Alliance, with Paul Levy and others, is to focus on several things. Gun violence is a critical issue and can be addressed through multiple sources: school jobs for the summer, but also new kinds of community investments. And we've put forward some ideas with the Philadelphia Equity Alliance around weed and seed kind of efforts that work very well in past decades. Small business, the disparate effect on small business, Black and Latino business, is very, very clear. So we think there should be a focus, as I put forward in my presentation, on supplier diversity. A lot of federal funding coming, particularly for infrastructure that could affect construction, capital access, but also commercial corridors, because those are the nodes of not just commerce, but the nodes of civic life. And as businesses have been devastated, the corridors have been decimated. And last piece is homelessness. This has become an issue gripping the major cities all over the United States. And there is some funding directly to help the homeless population. But again, it cuts across multiple funding sources and could generate some substantial innovative practice as we move forward. So I would say gun violence, small business writ large, and homelessness would be three priorities I can see Philadelphia embracing.
Thank you. I was on a call maybe 2 weeks ago, and they said to me that in the past, I'm going back 5, 10, even 15 years ago, Philadelphia didn't always get their fair share of these federal monies when they came to the table. So I guess my concern is, how do we make sure we get at least our fair share of the work and not be shortchanged?
Well, I think Philadelphia, and I've said this repeatedly, not just in Philadelphia, but outside of Philadelphia, I think you have one of the deepest benches of practitioners in the United States. A strong network, just talk about small business, strong network of CDFIs. The Enterprise Center is one of the top entrepreneurial support organizations in the entire country. A history of focus on commercial corridors. The PAGE initiative. Bids like Center City and University City that are the best in the country. So you've got a practitioner base that is deep and broad, and let them loose. I mean, this is the time for them to draw down more than Philadelphia's fair share across these multiple sources towards the North Star of equitable impact.
Last question for me, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. In the long run, all this money that's coming into our economy from the federal government, what does that mean for the economy in 5, 10 years from now? Does that mean more inflation? What would you tell us that we have to look out for? And as a city, what should we be considering in that light?
Well, for my own perspective, and this has to be coupled with the American Jobs Plan, because the American Jobs Plan is really President Biden's effort to build back better and restructure the economy towards new areas of innovative growth, clean energy. Philadelphia can play substantially in economic restructuring. So I think the key here is not just to focus on the lowest common denominator. Really treat this moment as the potential to rethink the function of the Philadelphia economy, because you have not been performing at the level you need to perform at in the terms of growing quality jobs for which a large portion of your population with the right skills and credentials could occupy and move up the ladder of opportunity. So this is not, to do the obvious, the conventional, what was done in the past. I think this is a moment to take President Biden at his word and think about what should the Philadelphia economy be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and back up from that. You are a global leader in genomics, gene and cell therapy, precision medicine, next generation energy, advanced manufacturing. This is a time for you to just seize the moment and use these federal funds to cement your position in these sectors of our economy that have multiplier effects on quality jobs, and then train the hell out of the population to fill them. That's what this moment is for.
All right, thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to recognize my colleague, Councilmember Derek Green, who's joined us. And I also want to thank you, Councilman Green, for connecting us with the National League of Cities. And I know you have some questions, so please go right ahead. Thank you, Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank this panel. In particular, I want to thank Mike Leeson from National League of Cities. We've been on various panels. It seems like we've been on a roadshow from your presentations for the National Black Caucus of local elected officials, as well as our NLC board. So thank you for being here and providing information. And also, I just want to thank the League for and when you think about the fact that, one, we have a $450 million deficit for the FY22, we have significant issues with our homeless population and those dealing with addiction, like opioid addiction. Public safety challenges is very well documented. You know, with the 499 homicides last year, already at a percentage much higher this year already. The fact that because of the pandemic, we had a significant reduction in the non-resident wage tax coming into the city. We are so reliant on that, as well as business income receipt tax, much different than what you see in Boston, where the reliability of real estate is a much higher percentage of the income coming to the city, as well as our pension issues and a depleted rainy day fund, as well as some of the other infrastructure perspectives that we have considering our city as a whole. So I guess my question, considering how we traditionally have received dollars and that we only use the dollars that have come based on what a source was, either from the state or the federal government. And I'm curious also, insight you may have seen in other cities, where would you say we should spend these dollars? I know Mr. Katz, you kind of gave some perspective. And I know Mr. Gleason, you know, from your presentation and my knowledge of the American Rescue Plan, like we can spend some money on infrastructure, or should we wait and spend money? Hopefully the American Jobs Plan gets past the reconciliation in the fall and use that as an infrastructure opportunity. Ideas like earmarks, which may be coming back, or the rainy day fund, or changing our tax structure as Councilmember Dom has proposed. So consider those various dynamics. I'm just curious, how would you allocate dollars if you had that perspective? Do we do a little bit across a bunch of different areas, or do we really take the dollars to really target specific issues to make fundamental change? And what would those issues be?
I would defer to Bruce first, and then I'll follow him.
Councilor, it's a great question. And I would say that as you cycle across the multiple challenges and opportunities that the city faces, the investment of dollars in certain areas will leverage private and civic capital. And because just of the way in which our economy works, whereas in other sectors, it really, the public sector dominates. So if you take small business, and I would say set some hairy, audacious goals for the next decade, because your starting point on Black and brown business, both in terms of their number and their size and their sector, needs a transformative impact. We need an entrepreneurial surge, essentially, in these communities to build wealth and to grow diverse hiring. So capacity building here could have a tremendous effect. I mean, I'll just give you one example. The Paycheck Protection Program, as initially devised, went primarily to mid-size and larger small businesses because they had relationships with banks and financial institutions. We learned our lesson. Della Clark Enterprise Center basically created an ecosystem where bookkeepers, accountants, and lawyers were connected to small Black and brown-owned businesses who were then linked to CDFIs, traditional banks, and fintech lenders. A small investment in that ecosystem will leverage up substantial amounts of private capital, which is backed by public dollars. And that's just one example of many in the small business realm. Supplier diversity. You're looking at billions coming in infrastructure spending potentially. That should be in the service of growing Black and brown pre-construction, construction, and post-construction firms. A little investment in the capacity of a new kind of supplier diversity intermediary, really a complement to Page on the public side, deal with the port, the airport, water, sewer, PHA, the schools. That's the way to grow this small business, these small business enterprises. So I would think about leverage and high return on investment with certain market-oriented investments. With other service-oriented investments, there still may be a market effect, but the public sector might dominate more dramatically. I hope that's responsive.
I'll also answer that, Councilman Green. While we're, as PICA, our role is more limited in that we have to ensure that the city is financially sound, that they don't run deficits, that they're through a 5-year plan. So that is our first main goal. Then the second goal is, and as I stated in my statement, I think the city needs to continue their sound fiscal policies, do better budgeting so that we can put money into the rainy day fund. And as we recall, before this pandemic, we were seeing fund balances in the $200 and $300 million, which helped us through this pandemic, as well as the $38 million that went into the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund. So I would say that is all important still. But however, I also discussed critical services, and it's not just going back to those services. We need to know what services are needed, are they performing well? Are we getting our best bang for the buck? Are they really serving the people that they're there to serve? And I think the city, when this money comes in, before they start just putting the money back into the city services, they really need to, and I know some people on council as well as PICA, we have been trying to get the city to do better performance measuring of the services, and the tax dollars are going into those services so that, one, we are delivering the needed services the most appropriate way and in the most fiscally sound way. So I think they need to keep that in their vision as they see these funds come in from the federal government and through the state government, and make sure that we restore critical services, but we do it wisely and fiscally soundly.
And I just have one brief follow-up, because I know we have a number of panelists and other members of the council that would like to testify. I just want to give one other analogy. And I think one of the challenges is that because of the pain of the pandemic, not only from all of the lives lost, businesses lost, and jobs lost, people are dealing with very significant economic challenges, where others have, benefited financially from the pandemic because of the stock market and other types of investments. So because of that, I haven't seen a proposal here, but let's say some other city, a real push to say, let's do what Michael Tubbs did in Compton and provide direct dollars to individuals in their jurisdiction. And we should do that because people are really challenged by the pandemic, either direct dollars or other type of direct financial resources to constituents, and they'll spend those dollars in the city with small businesses, and that will circulate the economy. Or what I heard from Mr. Kent saying, let's use dollars to really invest in businesses, and I'll use Philadelphia as an example, to really grow Black and brown businesses. And when you see the fact that we have a 25% poverty rate, the fact that 43% African-American population, but only 6% of the businesses with employees are owned by African Americans, 15% Latin population, but only 4% of the businesses with employees are owned from people of Latin descent. So both are different policy decisions on how you spend dollars. One is direct assistance, either through direct dollars or other financial programs that directly go to constituents that will be spent from a positive perspective in the community, but that's an immediate benefit. But some would say a longer term benefit that would provide a better leverage, using your words, Mr. Katz, would be investing in businesses. But that's not always the area that gets the most attention, because it's a lot easier for people to see, well, the benefit I'm getting right now is some type of financial benefit that's coming directly as a result of these dollars that can help people who are really going through some financial challenges because of the pandemic. But long term, it may be a better financial, I don't want to use the word play, but better financial benefit for the city by growing those businesses in various communities, specifically African American and Latin communities, which can provide additional revenue long term and multiply those dollars versus a short-term immediate impact of dollars being spent in the city. So I'm curious about your perspective on that, I think, conundrum that I see us in the city of Philadelphia and other cities dealing with.
One of the things that the New York the Federal Reserve Bank actually came out with, I believe last week, was a study about how stimulus funds have been used. So if you provide a direct, allocation of funds from the city's portion to residents, it may be used as savings, to provide safety nets. It may be used to pay down debt, but it may not be necessarily used to provide the injection into the economy that you're looking for. I think Mr. Katz's presentation has been excellent today, and I think he's done a great job of laying out the idea of leveraging up dollars to make long-term investments. And I believe sort of that's the spirit that this bill and the American Rescue Plan has in mind, Councilman Green.
Councilman Green, I would just say this. I think in the long term, we need to radically reduce racial and ethnic and spatial disparities on income, health, and wealth. And that's going to require a very close collaboration with the private and civic sectors. Philadelphia has one of the most advanced financial services sectors in the United States. You've got innovative efforts emerging, like Coded by Kids. I think you're going to hear from Sylvester Mobley later. New kinds of capital, more equity-like, seed, pre-seed for Black founders, Latino founders, revenue-based financing models that are emerging in parts of the country. I don't think we're coming out of this pandemic with the same kind of focus or approach to growing Black and Latino business as we had pre-COVID. Frankly, pre-COVID, I don't think we had any focus. So we're coming out of this with a different level of commitment and potentially with radically different kinds of products, which could be sourced with private capital, but potentially catalyzed by the public sector and then codified, routinized, as we've done in prior parts of our history. So I think Philadelphia, frankly, is primed to pioneer these products. And if you do so, you'll be growing from within, but you may be also attracting Black and Latino entrepreneurs from other parts of our country, which would be helpful for growing the population and growing the pie. So long-term, building wealth, building community wealth has to be a central component of this.
Thank you, Councilmember Down, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. I have one quick last question or a takeaway. I want to make sure I understood, Bruce, your presentation. You're basically saying that the Federal Investment Guide illustrates how the ARP funds, and I'm reading this from your presentation, will flow to 84 programs from 19 federal agencies via 7 distribution methods touching 15 plus policy areas. And on top of that, we also have the $1.4 billion coming to the city. And so would a recommended pathway for us be, let's see how we fill all those other programs before we get to the 1.4 coming to us, and see if we can allocate all of our needs into those other programs so we conserve the 1.4.
Well, I think you've got to use, just given the other presentations, you've got to use the 1.4 billion with some deliberateness. I mean, you've got a structural deficit. It's very real. I think Paul Levy and others have put forward some very interesting proposals on the tax side. The Equity Alliance and others have put forward very strategic, targeted areas of investment around gun violence, around summer school, around investments in small business that could leverage up other public but also private capital. So the bottom line with the 1.4 billion is you've just got to be incredibly deliberate about how you use those funds, knowing that there are other sources and knowing that certain investments have leveraging effects, big leveraging effects. And so I think all that has to be taken into account. But again, I am really struck working in multiple cities in the United States at the depth and breadth of your practitioner community and of the research community. So at least you have at your fingertips the evidence and information you need to make some smart choices.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank Mr. Gleason. I want to thank you, Mr. Rice, and thank you, Bruce Katz, for your testimony today. And I'd like to call on panel number 2 now.
Charmaine Matlock-Turner, Bill Golderer, Dr. Katrina Roman, and Lauren Gilchrist.
Okay, I think we're ready to start the first, and that would be Charmaine Matlock-Turner from the Urban Affairs Coalition. Good afternoon, Charmaine. Please go right ahead.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope that everyone can hear me.
Good.
Yes. Okay, good. I also want to thank Councilman O'Neill, co-chair of the committee, as well as all the other members of council who are here today to talk about this very, very important effort. Again, my name is Charmaine Matlock-Turner. I'm the president and CEO of the Urban Affairs Coalition, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about how the $1.4 billion in estimated federal aid coming to the city of Philadelphia through the American Rescue Plan can support those who are most in need in our city. UAC has been a trusted partner in supporting Americans for 50 years. We are a network of more than 80 area nonprofits and social entrepreneurs who are part of our UAC family of programs. UAC really applauds the federal government for really being very thoughtful with these stimulus dollars, making sure that there is direct aid that goes to individuals, working families, and benefits that will bridge the economic recovery, inclusive of the $1,400 stimulus checks, extending the $300 a week unemployment benefit, and increase eligibility for SNAP, or for those who don't know that title, for food stamp benefits. We also commend that the plan specifies funding for homelessness, which we've talked about already a little bit this afternoon, emergency rental assistance, which is absolutely critical in keeping people in their homes to make sure that we are fighting homelessness, as well as efforts around eviction prevention and expanding, as Councilman Green, I think, talked a little bit about earlier, housing counseling funding, the continuation of relief for direct loan borrowers, and fair housing activities for communities, families, and individuals to help stem historic inequities in our city as we recover for all. Given the city's identified COVID-related budget deficit, we do advocate that Philadelphia's allocation of $1.4 billion in stimulus funds be used to offset budget reductions of current city-funded nonprofit efforts striving to address the multiple needs of low and moderate income Philadelphians that have been impacted by the COVID pandemic. We believe that a focus on those who are most in need is critical. We know that before the pandemic, we had at least 400,000 Philadelphians of our 1.6 million citizens living below the poverty line. And we know that they are children, they are adults from working families, and senior citizens. UAC and our partner organizations work every day to counteract the deep and often generational impact of poverty. From being a strategic partner in Philadelphia pre-K, we're so glad to see that that was highlighted in the presentation by the earlier panel, improving early childhood education, to leading on the Read by Fourth Leadership Council, expanding early childhood literacy, to providing a number of life enrichment programs and activities throughout the year, from sports and wellness to after-school programs, that support and value working families in Philadelphia. I am encouraged that discussions on actions to reduce poverty, led by Council President Clark, you, Councilman Dom, and Councilwoman Quinones Sanchez, resulted in the creation of Council's Philadelphia Poverty Action Plan. As co-chair, along with Councilwoman Sanchez and you of the Reducing Poverty Committee, I attest that the Poverty Action Plan features game-changing innovations that invest directly in people. They include Philadelphia's first basic income and local housing subsidy programs, expanded benefit access tools for untapped state and federal dollars, which I know you've been a big proponent of and supporting, and a robust partnership between the School District of Philadelphia and Community College to invest in community schools and programs that close the skills gap through transitions from poverty wage jobs to family-sustaining careers. These recommended Poverty Action Plan initiatives are of particular benefit to the city's working families and low and moderate income households. We recommend that additional funding should be allocated from the city's stimulus allocation. Under the federal plan, for the first time in generations, the new child tax credit will reduce child poverty nationally. An infusion of financial assistance will be provided for childcare, broadband, and devices to homes without them, food assistance, and eviction protection for families who are desperately in need. UAC advocates that an investment of Philadelphia stimulus funds to be made to augment the expansion of local support for working families could be helpful. And of course, we must think of the next generation. I want to thank City Council and Council members Clark, Quinones Sanchez, and Dom, and Green, and so many others for leading the charge just this week to expand opportunities in the Summer Youth Employment Program by identifying new funding for that support. This year, we expect to have 8,000 young people working for the summer. I absolutely encourage us, though, to not stop there. We have an opportunity under this plan to finally get to what we know is critical for the next generation of Philadelphia's workers, and that's full employment for Philadelphia's teens in the summer. An investment of $30 million in stimulus funds could take us a long way over the next several years to get to full youth employment. As our city recharges, we must ensure that all Philadelphians grow with our city through diversity, equity, and inclusion framework and have equal opportunities to prosper. Again, I thank you for this hearing today, for all of us having an opportunity to see the big picture, but not to forget about those who are most in need, who an investment will build the bridge from poverty into the middle class. Thank you very much, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much. And we'll come back to, we'll go through the whole panel. I guess next is Bill Golder from United Way of Greater Philadelphia.
Councilmember Dom, I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes.
First, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge United Way board member and treasured friend, Charmaine Matlock-Turner. Thank you for your testimony. Councilmember, thank you for this opportunity to testify, and thank you and all your colleagues for your sure-footed and clear-headed leadership in a very trying moment for our neighbors. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Bill Golderer, and I'm proud to serve the mission of our community's United Way, serving over 160 community organizations throughout our region, 400 private investor companies that have welcomed us to help drive different impact in our community, a seat at the table of private philanthropy, and trying to work collaboratively and collegially with you all elected officials who share our common mission to meaningfully and measurably reduce poverty in our region and our city, and with a sense of urgency, work for greater opportunity for all of our neighbors. I don't have to remind any of you that our last season where we were in this position from 2009 to 2019, Philadelphia had the least equitable economic recovery of any major city, which means if you were in the top 4 quintiles or the top 80% of earnings, it was better to live in the Philadelphia region than anywhere in the country. Stable food prices, there was a nice availability of housing stock, affordability, there was economic opportunity. But if you found yourself in the bottom quintile, the bottom 20%, you found yourself and your family moving backward, but by minus 4%. That kind of disparity is untenable, and that is why this is the most urgent issue facing our city as we try to imagine a recovery that reaches every one of our neighbors. So to break this down, it's a very complex issue, a set of issues before us, but poverty and opportunity are about wealth creation, full stop. Building wealth is really the only way to escape poverty. And our neighbors need our help and our focus more than ever. Long before the stimulus passed, we were working with leaders from City Council to imagine ways to get money directly into Philadelphians' pockets, starting with every dollar that is owed to them through tax refunds, benefits available at the municipal level, the state level, and the federal level. Legislation with vision was passed by City Council in November of 2020 to establish the Poverty Action Fund that provided for so many a beacon of hope and a commitment to all of our neighbors that was really prescient. Council met the moment, and in the face of the pandemic and facing a yawning deficit, this was a bold vision that put people first and took a risk on, it looked at the need for short-term provisions to reimagine systems so that supports that could allow Philadelphians to receive all that they qualify for could begin to become a reality. In the near term, inside of 3 years, through a renewed spirit of collaboration, focus, and commitment among the private sector, private philanthropy, the public sector, and community partners, our collective efforts stand to build the capacity of organizations large and small that can help our residents move meaningfully out of poverty. The United Way is working in partnership with a legion of donors and investors to match the $10 million that was appropriated through the Poverty Action Fund, so that with private funds and public funds together, we can implement evidence-based solutions that lift our neighbors out of poverty and open them to new opportunities. For the first time, we are looking at an effort that stands to help us scale interventions that actually work. As the city considers how to invest local stimulus funds, I encourage you to stay the course on this bold trajectory as we seek proven and promising solutions that respond to the very real and very urgent needs that our neighbors are facing and the setbacks that came in front of them as a result of this pandemic that are not limited to the pandemic. There were underlying forces, including systemic racism, that have been holding so many of our neighbors back from them realizing their chance to pursue happiness and well-being. The first round of investments could stand to be a lesson for how we think about the future in what we call the Family Stability Challenge. It combines a rare combination of trying to segment particular expertise that helps people draw benefits with trusted, culturally relevant community organizations that have built trust over decades. By putting those kinds of organizations and collaborations together, we think there will be a new result. It will reach every Philadelphia zip code, and it will have a direct benefit in terms of cash and new income into our neighbors' benefits accounts. Across zip codes, across areas of expertise, and even across different ideologies, people have come together because they knew the urgency that we were all up against. The investment strategy is laser focused, and it's focused on doing three things well. And I think this has implications for the other things we might consider as we walk through this murky future together: scaling, collaborating, and being accountable to outcomes. First, we are investing significant resources in community-based organizations so that they can scale the good work they're already doing. For years and years, we've asked partners in communities to do more with less, as we often do. Because the scale of the issues we're facing are greater, we need to invite them to do more with more and carefully measure what incredible work they're able to do if they're appropriately resourced. The Poverty Action Plan invested in community-based organizations to provide on-the-ground outreach alongside trusted, culturally relevant organizations that have reach and trust in communities that are often overlooked or have reason to not have trust. It's important to invest in new technologies, new approaches, new models that can really change the game for getting income into our neighbors' pockets, but that can never replace familiar faces in your neighborhoods who are carrying a proverbial clipboard, who are a part of the communities where these services are being offered. It needs to be a both and. New models, new approaches, curiosity, technology forward ideas and solutions with a combination of being in communities with people that are trusted. That's how we put people first. The second piece that is, and before I move on, we need to know the cost of not succeeding in this way. We know that in the first round of stimulus payments, a little north of 60,000 Philadelphians did not collect the payments that they were owed and missed out on a collective $7 million more in desperately needed support. And this time around, the stakes are even higher for us to get it right. Families with children will receive, on average, an additional $6,600 and could see as much as $10,000 in new income. This is game-changing for lower-income families who are trying every day to make their reality a little bit better. The courageous vision of the Poverty Action Fund, the driving of scaling initiatives to meet the amount of need, the desire and sense of urgency of putting cash in people's pockets is what needs to guide our future. Are people better in a way that we can demonstrate for having put forward programs that serve people's needs? That leads me to the second point. What is missing? This is hard to measure, but its impact is unlimited. What is missing and what is needed is incentivizing and investing in collaboration over the long term. It took us more than a minute to get to this place, and it's going to take courage and commitment to stay the course. And it will require more than a little will on the part of members of City Council and the administration. But for decades, and we've got to own this, we have practiced the Hunger Games among community organizations, and we've also found our way into splintering a million worthy initiatives. But when we practice the Hunger Games by pitting community organizations against each other for resources and have a million splintered different initiatives with different objectives and not a common set of measures, it dilutes our impact and it erodes trust. It creates cynicism on the ground. We believe that by getting behind a unified poverty action plan with a clear set of metrics, what lies beneath it is the need to structure an initiative that has emphasized organizational humility and drives deep partnership. People need to know why collaboration can scale our efforts and why we will be able to grow the pie of resources if we find ways to meaningfully adopt this approach. Because when we don't, our neighbors get hurt, our neighbors lose out on resources for which they are eligible and deserve. And while accessing benefits is not the most sizzly idea that anyone has ever come up forward with, it is a proven intervention that leads our neighbors on a pathway to greater prosperity. And we need to stay focused, and whether or not we are being successful relies on our ability to drive meaningful collaboration and to work to build trust. The third, and I'll be finished at this one, there's a family stability challenge underway, and the next challenge as part of the Poverty Action Plan is about jobs and opportunity. And throughout every challenge that we embark upon on this public-private partnership that has no precedent, is to build underneath it a measurement and accountability framework that helps us better understand what works and why when it comes to alleviating poverty and driving opportunity for more of our neighbors. We will invest in services that Philadelphians can count on to deliver results. If we can't evaluate the impact of our efforts, the framework needs to adapt and adjust to make sure that our resources are being used in a way that really lift our neighbors. I want to acknowledge the leadership of Council President Clark, of Councilwoman Sanchez, of you, Councilman Dom, for many of your and all of your colleagues who have leaned in shoulder to shoulder in a moment where it was particularly hard to do. And I'm at your service to create the sense of urgency and investment that our neighbors most deserve. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'll come back to some questions. Thank you again for the testimony. Now we'll go to Dr. Katerina Roman from Temple University.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me here today. My name is Katerina Roman, and I'm a professor in the Department of Criminal Justice at Temple University. In my testimony today, I draw on 30 years as a researcher and evaluator studying community violence and evaluating promising neighborhood-based gun violence reduction initiatives, not only in Philadelphia, but around the country. Now, I don't have to tell you that we're in a very challenging situation in Philadelphia. The escalation of homicides and shootings is particularly troubling. However, in the coming months, the city and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will have an opportunity to be creative and direct resources to organize efforts to address violent crime. And I specifically mean shootings. As a researcher here in Philadelphia, I've evaluated both law enforcement and community-based models that include, for example, focused deterrence, Philadelphia ceasefire, the Kensington Initiative, what is ongoing now in Kensington, the district attorney's CARES model, which is a trauma-informed crisis support program for survivors of homicide. I've been asked today to discuss evidence-based solutions to gun violence and how the city could address Philadelphia's epidemic of gun violence if more resources were available. Now, in the recent past, I've testified a number of times in Philadelphia and at the state level about specific models that are considered evidence-based, such as ceasefire, or also known as cure violence, and focused deterrence. So at this time, I'd like to go one step further and address what I consider to be the process and structural aspects of community gun violence reduction. And I do believe, and I can explain this more in the questions, that we should start by creating a single entity, a collaborative guiding body that both facilitates short-term safety and long-term peace, one that generates enough returns on the investment to fund future prevention and intervention initiatives past the range of this current funding. We have a historic gun violence problem. Right now, I think we're at 550 shootings in less than 4 months. The scale of the solution has to be equal to the scale of the problem. We can't simply implement evidence-based interventions that target only the shooters or those already arrested on gun charges. Neither can we do things piecemeal with little coordination and then expect great reductions in violence. We have to use a comprehensive public health framework that includes not only models of intervention, but directed at prevention. And prevention means investment in coordinated efforts at the population or community level that are geared toward reducing those risk conditions and expanding resiliency. And simply put, we need to get in front of the violence before it occurs. So I recommend the city use new funds to create a collaborative entity that has the singular focus of coordinating and implementing community-driven state-of-the-art models of gun violence prevention and intervention in targeted areas that are the home to the most of the gun violence. The programs and services delivered should be explicitly coordinated both within and across the neighborhoods with activities and results measured at every step. The leadership of this group, which would include community voices, would work together toward careful implementation and adherence to research-based or evidence-based practices. This entity could include or have a separate philanthropic group that can provide oversight and leadership towards this effort and help leverage additional funds. The implicit assumption here is that an array of carefully executed, coordinated, evidence-based activities towards a common goal can bring about greater success with the desired outcomes than any single set of programs or activities operating in isolation. So drawing on the research evidence, I'm going to put forth 6 evidence-based principles that could help define a collaborative body and achieve maximum effectiveness across gun violence efforts. Principle 1, use data and analysis to focus on a specific set of neighborhoods where most of the violence is occurring. We know from the current work of the Philadelphia Police Department, the Office of the Attorney General, and my colleagues in my work evaluating ceasefire and focused deterrence, that a place-based focus using careful assessment of the drivers of violence, both social and environmental, which can include the physical environment, delivering prevention and intervention to those drivers in these specific geographic locations can maximize success. The collective entity would help oversee these locally based, community-led efforts in each neighborhood. Principle 2, work from a sound knowledge base, using and really getting a deep understanding of the community. We should build from what works and what worked before. Many of you here know that the city and Temple worked together and implemented and studied Philadelphia ceasefire, which was in the 22nd Police District. And over a 2-year period, the targeted hotspots had 30% fewer shootings versus the hotspots that did not have ceasefire. The program utilizes credible messengers from the target area who play a mentoring role in assisting their clients to make choices that could impact the rest of their lives. We need to implement this effective program in additional areas in the city and continue to measure how successful it is. And an important point here is being implemented with fidelity, and that not all organizations have the capacity to stand up a tried and true model. Principle 3, be community driven. It will help build civic engagement and community cohesion. And these strategies that are implemented should reflect the cultural norms and the histories of the communities. And the community partners can help find the balance between evidence-based programs and their practical viability on the ground in the neighborhoods, which are so different and each have their own sets of vulnerability and their own sets of strengths. Principle 4, work together. The leadership body must coalesce and streamline, be focused on removing the redundant bureaucracies, the gaps in planning, the duplication of services that we know exist, but we so not want to talk about. Interagency collaboration and a true partnership with the community requires dedicated staff whose job is to coordinate, build relationships, and who'll be receptive to different approaches. With the onset of COVID-19 and the pandemic, Marla Davis Bellamy of Philadelphia Ceasefire launched the Philly Hub, and I think she recently testified this public health approach to crime prevention breaks down silos, and they brought over 20 organizations together weekly to provide immediate support services to families and area residents who are, in most instances, have been impacted by violent crime. With new resources, the Philly Hub could incorporate a ceasefire street outreach team, expand its trauma-informed approach to reach most major hotspots. We did a return on investment analysis for ceasefire and found a positive return. And just think what the city could do linking the collaborative hub model to ceasefire. Principle 5, and I only have a few more, begin earlier by supporting primary prevention. We heard a lot about this earlier. Prioritize children and young people, focusing on building resiliency at all developmental stages. This includes high-quality childcare, Head Start, for instance. Prevention in this vein would lead to multifaceted outcomes beyond violence reduction, including academic success, increased employability, and economic self-sufficiency. We often don't think of when someone says violence reduction or gun violence, we don't always think about these prevention efforts, but they should all be considered on this continuum that work towards gun violence reduction. Principle 6, make adequate resources available for the comprehensive strategy. And I'm just going to mention 2 priorities here. The resource investment should be directed towards building a culture of nonviolence across prevention and intervention activities, where we're looking closely at the models that support the norms that are pro-social and affording individuals and children, youth, families, these social connections. This will help build resilience. Basically, we know that the pro-social connections are the bread and butter of prevention through churches, athletics, school attachment, adult role modeling, and peer mentoring, such as Ceasefire and Cure Violence and the District Attorney's CARES programs offers. The second priority would be ample provision of resources for training and technical assistance that's expressly devoted to increasing organizational and collaborative capacity. This is a lot like the community capacity development that I think it was Dr. Katz and others talked about in the earlier panel. It is so common in violence reduction program. We forget how to think about what is needed in the different communities. There are misunderstandings in how to target a program to the right population. It's often difficult to do implementation in programs that are complex. Community providers don't have sufficient resources for data systems. There's weak performance reporting or limited planning for sustainability. So trainings could include a public health approach to gun violence prevention, data-driven problem solving, risk and resiliency factors, performance reporting. I think I mentioned a lot more in my written testimony. And last, and we heard about this before, be accountable. We must be collecting data on performance and reporting out to the public at regular periods, and including a plan for rigorous evaluation. This is not just so these programs and the whole strategy is accountable to the public, but it also helps to be able to reflect and change course or autocorrect if needed. And I know there's often pushback from government agencies and communities not wanting to use dollars for outside academic evaluation because it takes needed money away from services. And then the city and state could work with foundations to leverage their funds for research and evaluation. Arnold Ventures and Chan Zuckerberg's new Justice Accelerator Fund are two great examples of private foundations making the commitment to research and evaluation. In conclusion, I believe a comprehensive, coordinated strategy with ample investment in a violence reduction infrastructure with systematic, research-informed processes will provide a lifeline to organizations and efforts like Philadelphia Ceasefire, Cure Violence, the Group Violence Intervention, the DAO CARES, the School Diversion Program, and others that have a proven track record. With this coordination and increased capacity, they can expand their programs to meet the scale of the program and ultimately save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roman, and we'll come back to you with some questions, but our last panelist on panel number 2 is Lauren Gilchrist from Philadelphia Real Estate Alliance. So Lauren, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chairman Dom and members of the Committee on Fiscal Sustainability and Intergovernmental Cooperation. We really appreciate the opportunity to testify today. As Councilman Dom said, my name is Lauren Gilchrist, and I'm the SVP for Research at JLL in Philadelphia, along with the immediate past president of NAIOP Greater Philadelphia and the current co-chair of NAIOP's Government Affairs Committee. I'm here, though, today in a slightly different capacity to introduce a new high-level and forward-thinking coalition in the real estate industry, the Philadelphia Real Estate Alliance. The Alliance is made up of residents of BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association, the BIA, the Building Industry Association, the GBCA, the General Building Contractors Association, and NAIOP, which is the Commercial Real Estate Developers Association. Together, the constituents of these organizations represent a cross-section of the largest owners, developers, investors, property management firms, and construction contractors in the city across all sectors, including residential, commercial, and industrial. And today I'm joined by 3 of my colleagues in this capacity, Mo Rushdie from the BIA, Don Haas from BOMA, as well as Ben Connors from the GBCA, should the committee have any questions directly for them once I finish my testimony. The Philadelphia Real Estate Alliance promotes the inclusive growth of Philadelphia by supporting policies that foster Philadelphia's economic competitiveness, promoting a predictable real estate development regulatory environment, and encouraging investment domestically and internationally. To achieve this purpose, the Alliance brings together diverse real estate organizations to collaborate with government and industry for solutions to Philadelphia's business, economic, and social challenges that can be addressed through real estate policy, development, and investment. We seek to partner with the administration as well as City Council to achieve these goals. We're here today to provide our thoughts on the unique opportunity that the funding from the Federal American Rescue Plan Act presents to Philadelphia by sharing a set of principles we believe the city should consider in allocating these resources. So we have three principles. One, we believe that the ARP funds should be used to restore necessary COVID-19 budget cuts first and foremost, to allow the city to fiscally bridge the gap in revenues from the pandemic and associated economic downturn until there's a full economic recovery. In this process, negate the need for any tax increases while the city's residents and businesses recover from the economic downturn. Given these are one-time resources, we believe the focus of their use should be on one-time expenditures. We do not believe the city should create new programs or obligations that the budget would need to sustain once the ARP funds are expended. Number two, we believe ARP funds should be expended quickly, effectively, and efficiently, providing an immediate boost to the economy to trigger recovery. We need to entice employers, employees, customers, and visitors to come back to the city. We believe a specific focus on making public transportation a safe and healthy option for residents, the workforce, and visitors will be critical to this effort. But we also think long-term, use for these funds should lay the groundwork for sustained growth. We believe using the ARP fund for initiatives that will have immediate impact within the next 12 to 18 months, while also laying this long-term groundwork for a prosperous Philadelphia over the next 10 to 20 years are its best uses. Finally, as members of the real estate industry, we want to highlight one specific area where we see an immediate need. We're beginning to observe a potential challenge in construction capacity overall, but particularly with regard to the construction workforce and minority and women-owned firms. Federal capital funds are being provided to the city, the Philadelphia School District, the airport, and other public agencies, which is going to result in unprecedented increases in construction demand. Furthermore, the residential real estate community's focus on the timing of the change of the city's tax abatement program is creating a large number of projects aiming to obtain permits this year to start construction next year. The convergence of these factors may create a perfect storm where government and the real estate industry will face serious capacity issues with regard to contractors and labor. Therefore, we recommend some portion of the ARP funds be used to broaden the pool of potential workers by opening up larger and more frequent apprenticeship programs and building the capacity for small contractors to grow by training construction workers. These funds could also be used to finance the growth and development of construction businesses with a special focus on the minority community and Black and brown construction firms. In conclusion, we're facing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and need to succeed at the highest level at this moment in time. This is our collective chance to promote the city's comeback from COVID. The city has had a strong run in the last 10 years, gaining jobs, population, and tax revenues, but we cannot assume that this trend will necessarily continue post-pandemic. Much has changed, and the city must be focused and aware of the need to reestablish its role as the center of a growing local and regional economy, rebuilding jobs and business growth opportunities for a more inclusive and diverse group of participants. These ARP funds should have a strong focus on fostering the city's economy and create a climate for the city to have strong, sustained, inclusive growth. Investments in infrastructure, safe and dependable public transit, workforce development, and advancement of small Black and brown businesses will pay dividends for generations to come. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and the Alliance would be happy to address your questions.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you. And I do have a few quick questions for everyone. So I'm going to start with Charmaine Matlock Turner. And Charmaine, I saw you taking a lot of notes there. That's pretty good.
Thank you.
Sure. So, you talked about the funding and you talked about the summer jobs program. I know we had an appropriations meeting where we approved some money, but give us an idea of the types of results we can see when we invest in those programs, the summer programs, and the benefits, so people can really understand how important that is.
Yes, this program has been studied over the years. We've had studies by Brookings, we've had studies from others looking at programs not only in Philadelphia, but looking at programs in Boston and in Chicago. And we know that connecting young people to jobs early in their careers really gives them an opportunity to do two things. One, to focus on school and graduation. The idea is that they see the possibility that they could be doing something different than maybe what they see in their communities, and that they ultimately make better choices. They also have dollars and resources available to support themselves and their families, and they make real connections in the broader community so that they have other kinds of opportunities, other caring adults to connect to. So we have looked at this area for a long period of time, and the demand is there. Last summer, in the middle of the pandemic, 20,000 young people signed up to say, I want to work. And what did we have to say to them? Sorry, we really don't want you to get involved in those other things, but we don't have anything for you other than the 6,000 that we were able to help. We believe that if we ultimately say to young people, all of the other things that we need them to know early on, but that in Philadelphia, you have a partner to the middle class through youth employment opportunities, that we are going to see a difference in not only violence, but really in hope. This is not just about talking about what we're trying to fight against. This is talking about what we're trying to build into.
Thank you. I'm a big supporter of that program, and I hope we can get you more money for it. And I think I would love to expand it, by the way, to make it an opportunity for our high school students in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade to take a page out of the Cristo Ray book and allow them to work 1 day a week, go to school for 4 days, and have 4 different job experiences. It is a game changer for them. So whatever we can do to support that.
It is. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you very much. And on behalf of our young people, thank you.
Thanks. So Bill Golderer, doing an amazing job at United Way. Poverty Action Fund has distributed about $4.5 million, I think, so far in grants. Can you share a little about which groups receive those grants, the kind of work they do, its impact on poverty, and how's that Poverty Action Fund prioritizing the grant giving? And is that a model you think could work for like prioritizing where the ARP dollars are going?
You would think I would know how to do mute by now. Forgive me. Councilman, thank you for your leadership again. And let me explain the impact this way. And you've asked this question before, but I want to make sure we keep our eyes on the prize for this kind of $4.5 million of investment in building a collaborative infrastructure that combines the expertise of household names like Benefits Data Trust, like Campaign for Working Families. These are names of organizations that you know that are trusted and they're proven. But what's different about this initiative, it is combining what I call the app and the clipboard. It is not enough to provide technology solutions when communities want to see someone holding a clipboard and they want to know the person who's holding that clipboard. Oh, you're related to, or I know you, or I remember you from. It's got to be reaching aggressively into communities that do not feel like they're able to trust. So one of the things that was powerful, I'll just tell you a quick story. John Chin from Chinatown Development Corporation called me on the phone and said, you're asking us to do this on an incredibly aggressive timeline. And in some ways, it's really going to be difficult for us to do this well. And yet, we're going to be working with Otis Bullock for the first time from Diversified Community Services. We've never, ever worked together. And then I called Akana on the phone to say, listen, we've got to pull this together. We have greater resources. That's important. But the need is so great that if we don't reach across our geography, our discipline, our reach for this once in a, frankly, generation effort, how can we ask city council and other philanthropists to focus their attention if we're not willing to focus? And here's what's on the line, Councilman, and I'll cede the floor. We need to get serious about how we are doing relative to other markets, right? I would tell you, and I'm not trying to create a controversy here, but Baltimore is much better at drawing down benefits than we are. Like on the order of their success rate in terms of impoverished communities pulling down these benefits is they're about 24% better than we are at this on a per capita basis. We have to be ambitious about getting better and demonstrating that this kind of work returns, as you know, the number 13 to 1. Every dollar we invest in this, there's a 13 to 1. Now there's diminishing returns after a point, but for right now, we're very far away from that point. And so driving this kind of community investment with expertise in partnership, making sizable investment and measuring what happened, as my university colleague mentioned, if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. And we need to be serious about measurement, particularly as it relates to our neighbors.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment and recognize that Councilman Squilla has joined us, and so is Councilmember Quinona Sanchez. So thank you for being here. And Bill, let me just ask you this question. How can Baltimore be doing a better job than us? Like, what do we need to do better? That's not good. What do we have to do to improve?
So there's two answers there. The first is when I would say there's a parallel, and I'm not making light of this. When you have very limited resources, whether you're a family or you're a city, you're trying to get the highest impact return on the available resources. So you have to get your best guess as to what methodology is going to yield the biggest return. And just in all candor, right now, as I referenced before, we weren't betting on the collaborative approach. We were doing the Hunger Games. We were picking this organization, but not looking into community insight. We are looking at these folks with the technology, which is very, very important, but we were not looking at the clipboard. We've got to be more proximate to people's struggle. That's what's new about this. The second thing, Alan, is the worst thing we could do, excuse me, council member, is to do it once for 6 months and then walk away and try something else. Our initiatives at social change and social mobility suffers from attention deficit disorder. We started on this bold initiative. We are literally 60 days into it. We have to stay the course for 3 years and measure the return. Otherwise, we will have, frankly, wasted resources and time and, frankly, hope. People are beginning to believe that collaborations can work, that we should invest in those. But as I don't need to tell my friend Charmaine, this town cultivates cynicism in the water. And it's a spiritual crisis. We need to believe in the better angels of each other and drive real collaboration. And I'll tell you, there's a number of folks who are sitting on the sidelines of this initiative who are waiting for it to fail. And we just got to be like, no, not this time, not with these stakes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. One quick question for Dr. Roman. You mentioned the crime prevention programs, and it sounded to me like ceasefire was used by the city a few years ago, maybe in the 2010, 11, 12, 13 time period. And have they stopped using those programs?
So ceasefire was came about through a federal grant from that Marla Davis Bellamy wrote, but the solicitation required that the government be the fiscal agent. So that $2.5 million that hit the ground, I think probably by the time everything was implemented was spring of 2013. When that ended, there was not a commitment by the city to continue supporting that street team by Temple University. It's there, and I think you'll see that there are different views about why it ended. I was the evaluator on that. I really believe that a lot of people in the city wanted to fund, rightly so, community groups. And Temple University is a big institution, but a lot of individuals didn't take the time to see the individuals who were hired as part of the street team and how it was run and how community driven it was and the partnership approach that was used. So when the federal funding ended, there was no sustainability plan from the city. Marla, myself, and a number of colleagues were scrambling to write grants to keep it going. To date, Marla has funded her street team and Kathy Reeves and others through Cure Violence and Ceasefire with other money that aren't necessarily city dollars. The street team has been funded mostly through PCCD state grants coming down from federal dollars.
Do you have any information or a proposal for the city on utilizing ceasefire over a 1, 2, or 3 year period and what the results might be?
Yes, and I know Marla has been working on that. So her dream and what we've been discussing is linking, and I mentioned that in my testimony, is creating a comprehensive structure that incorporates the street outreach team of ceasefire with the hub model. So you're doing crisis intervention, you're doing prevention and intervention jointly. And so the goal is to find funding to expand that to between 6 and 10 hot spots in and around North Philly, the wide swatch of North Philly that would include Kensington and Central North. And I think the amount of money that she's been discussing and running the budget has been about $6 million, should create a huge return on the investment, because we know what I mentioned earlier, just from ceasefire without the hub model, ceasefire returned, I think it was $1.60 in first year healthcare costs. But if you take that down to the social costs and added in the cost of a prison term, not being employed, other harms from being involved in gun violence, I think I jotted some numbers down. If you took the $6 million, and I'm not even adding on the value from the hub, you could have a $192 million return when you take those downstream costs that you wouldn't be incurring because of this model.
Is that $6 million, Dr. Roman, over a year, 2 years, or 3 years?
That $6 million. So in calculating that, I think that might be over 2 years. So that's usually the time that you think about implementing, getting everyone on board and implementing it, and saying we need a good 2 years to have this implemented, operational, and making an impact. So I think that's about a 2 year period of costs, and then where the measurement would come in.
Do you have any statistic on what the percentage of homicide reduction could be?
So I think, I evaluated, the policing focused deterrence also in Cure Violence and then, the outreach team, the Cure Violence ceasefire model. I think, and the literature from the evaluations from around the country show that if you implement ceasefire with fidelity, that you can expect anywhere from a 25 to a 40% reduction in shootings. And so in Philadelphia, in those hotspots, we saw a 30% reduction in shootings, and if you over a 2 year period, but that's still hundreds, a couple hundred lives in that period. And just think about getting that to scale. And New York City has done much of this in bringing it to scale in those communities.
Is this the same program that's also being used in Chicago, like with Arnie Duncan? Is it similar?
It's somewhat so, Arnie. So what's happening in Chicago now? Chicago still has Cure Violence, but they've also extended it. And some of you may know there's a program called Ready Chicago that has decided that you can't just do the peer model. You also need to get individuals involved into jobs. And then so the peer outreach model would then go out and do the outreach, do the violent, the mediations and the violence interruption, and then try to get those individuals into transitional jobs. That is a separate component and that has shown with the experimental design evaluation in Chicago, much success.
So I just want to be concise here. You're saying it's about a $6 million investment over a 2 or 3 year period. And you think we can cut the gun violence 20 to 30% per year?
30%, yes.
This seems like was something we should be doing immediately based on those numbers.
We've been saying this, and again, I'm saying this, I come from the Urban Institute. I worked at a think tank for 20 years before I came to Temple University, where I traveled around the country and evaluated all types of programs, gang intervention, prevention, comprehensive program modeling. And I truly believe that the central core of this peer mentoring outreach, coupled with, if you have the hub and resources available for jobs, for transitional jobs, you can make a huge dent in violence. But again, it's implementing it with fidelity. Not everyone can do. I think that another organization is running a street outreach model, but they're not trained in the evidence-based model, and they're not, they don't have the support of, now the knowledge and support and the training from Cure Violence Global to reevaluate when needed. And I think that really matters too. You can't just take any outreach program, is what I'm saying, and say, we have some outreach workers, put them in the community and it'll work. It needs to be a strong attention to fidelity to the model.
All right, well, thank you. I think we'll be back to you sooner than later, because I do think that's a really good program. And if the city can't fund it, I would go to the business community to fund this. This is like something we should be doing. This is a no-brainer to me.
There are models of business funding and other funding. Chicago uses their athletes, their professional athletes together, brought them all together to say, this is our goal, but there has to be a singular focus on this mission of reducing gun violence.
We'll be back to you, and I know my colleagues will probably want to work on this with me, so we'll be back to you on this, because this sounds like a good idea. It really does, so thank you very much. And now let's go to Lauren. I have a couple of questions for you, Lauren. Thanks for your testimony. The role of office space and commercial real estate in Philadelphia's economy is so important. How has this sector really fared in the past 12 months during the pandemic, and what will it take, in your opinion, for this sector to make a robust recovery and come back?
Sure thing. Thank you, Madam. The first thing I would say is that it's important to note just how severe the impact has been. So we calculated that we have lost just in Center City over the course of the pandemic approximately $1 billion in retail demand, which is significant when you think about all of the small businesses, particularly that serve office workers. At the height of the pandemic, we would have calculated that approximately only a 10% of the office workforce was actually in offices, which is what supports, that retail demand drop off. We at JLL believe net, we will see a 5% overall drop off in demand for office space over the next 3 years. But the question is, how do we get, from call it that 10 to 20% figure people in offices now back up to what we should be, which is 85% of the workforce in offices. And a lot of that has to do very specifically with the transportation related issues. So making sure that people feel safe coming and going on SEPTA, coming and going on the subway system. And it also, depends on quality of life related issues. Businesses want to have their employees together when they can host meetings and when they can be out and about together. And with all of the retail and hospitality closed, with the increasing number of homeless and panhandling experiences that people are having, I think a lot of folks are kind of going, hold on, we're not sure that this is the environment that we can bring professional, visitors to. So I think a lot will depend upon quality of life overall. And then we also need to give it a few more months for the corporate real estate community to determine how much office space they'll be using. Our major corporate clients, have pushed the decision-making timeline into, call it the summer and fall, not just for return to work, but in terms of, are we going to see people restack or replan for offices? So there are some question marks there, and some of that will be determined by how do workers feel coming back.
Thank you. So I guess, I think it's 40 or 41% of our workforce does not live in the city and pays us wage taxes. And so we want to make sure they come back to the city and work, and we have that base. But it's not just the wage taxes and working in the city, it's their activity in the city. It's all the demand they bring into the city what are they buying at retail stores or restaurants or whatever they're shopping for, that demand is sorely needed by our retailers and entrepreneurs in the city. For your group, Lauren, the $1.4 billion, what would your recommendations be from the city's standpoint? Would it be transit, safety, lifestyle, tax issues? Where do you think you'd like to see some of that money invested?
Well, I think, as I stated in my testimony, first and foremost, we'd like to make sure there are no tax increases. Certainly, there's been discussions that we've had, on many occasions about tax decreases, which would be ideal for overall competitiveness. But first and foremost, we can't make it more expensive to do business in the city. And I think that's one of the real promises of the ARP funds. The second would be to, focus on those public transit issues that I had mentioned overall, to make sure that people believe that they can get to and from the city safely. And then third, the public safety and the, call it quality of life issues are also important, that they feel comfortable continuing to do business. I also think that there is a generational moment here, as I think many of the other panelists have talked about, and that where we need to be thinking about what are the catalytic investments that we can be making infrastructure-wise that will return multiple X the dollar figures that we've been awarded. Because when we set the benchmarks for the long-term growth of the city, think about that 10 to 20-year plan, as I think Councilman, you put, a certain percentage of, money into a program, a project, a real estate deal, and it returns multiple X, those investment dollars. So we need to think about not just how do we stop, the bleeding, to how do we advance the economy, to how do we actually plan for the kind of Philadelphia that we all want to be living and working in 20 years from now. And there's enough money here to do that. And one of the reasons we mentioned Black and brown real estate businesses, Black and brown contractors, was because we believe that our industry can play also a catalytic role when we have new projects to bring new participants into the workforce through job training, through education, and through participation in real estate moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I want to thank panel number 2, Charmaine Matlock-Turner, Bill Golder, Dr. Katarina Roman, and Lauren Gilchrist. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for being here. Very informative. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Panel number 3.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think panel number
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes, I had a very quick comment for panel number 2. I just wanted to thank each and every panelist from panel number 2, Charmaine Matlock-Turner from Urban Affairs Coalition, Bill Golderer from the United Way of Greater Philadelphia, Dr. Roman from Temple, and Lauren Gilchrist from the Philadelphia Real Estate Alliance. I appreciate a lot of the feedback you shared and offered, and I think that's really a blueprint for us as we move into the budget session to figure out what we are focusing on as we look ahead to our city's recovery. So I just wanted to thank you so much for your needed testimony and for some of the recommendations you offered.
Thank you. And we're here to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let's go to panel number 3, and we can call it the next panel.
The next panel is Logan Weldy, Matt Rader, and David Fair.
And Mr. Weldy, if you can identify yourself and start with your testimony, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. Councilmember Dom and I see Councilwoman Catherine Gilmore Richardson. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. And Councilmember Dom, you should know Laurel did a great job of organizing this, so I appreciate all of the work she did also. So, as I said, my name is Logan Weldy. I'm a staff attorney and the legislative director for Clean Air Council. We're an environmental nonprofit based on environment and health in Philadelphia. I'm also a block captain and a Ward 14 committee person. I did submit written testimony, and I'm not going to read everything. I also submitted a separate list of policy ideas to Laurel. I want to say at the outset that there were a lot of really good things that people said earlier today. One of the most important, I think, is, and you all know this by now, there will be other funds. Don't duplicate efforts. Work with other agencies. And that was going to be part of my testimony, so I'm not going to cover that. But, DVRPC and some of the really great government agencies and non-government agencies in Philadelphia. and it's already been stated over and over, this is a wonderful opportunity, and I know you guys don't want to squander this as much as the residents and people who work in Philadelphia want this to be successful. We need to really maximize the investments and look towards immediate relief and then long-term benefits. We need to first address inequality. This city has really a long history of having racial divide, and we have a high low income rate, and these funds could be so transformative. Someone else mentioned that a lot of people hadn't even received their funds, Council Member Dom, and I know you have worked in the past to make sure people receive their funds. I have a few homeless people on my block that I've worked with to get them registered so they could receive these funds. I think that would be one of the most important things we could do. Is, someone mentioned earlier, that is transformative. This person literally has no money. Imagine he's getting $1,400. That would change his life. So whatever efforts we can do to reach out to Philadelphians to make sure they get these funds, the individual funds. I'm not talking about the $1.4 billion, obviously. So along with COVID-19, we are experiencing multiple concurrent crises. Our school system is failing too many people, the escalating gun violence that we've heard a lot about today. There's inundation of litter, broken sidewalks, lack of green space. We've got the highest asthma rate, obesity rates, safe housing for people. We need to address these sources of drama, and Clean Air Council really believes that this money can go a long way. But you, the leaders, must be willing to open your minds and think outside of the box. Look towards other programs throughout the country and even throughout the world that have shown to be cost wise and return on the investment almost immediately. You've got to look at the data. When you do look at the data, you'll see that investing and cleaning up the city is one of the most important things we can do. I know Dr. Roman just spoke about gun violence, and Council Member Dom, she did have a great program that would reduce it by 30%. And you'll hear, I think, from another group today about another way to reduce gun violence, and that's cleaning up neighborhoods and greening them. When people live in clean and green spaces, they just feel better. I live in a very trashed neighborhood. When I walk into cleaner neighborhoods, I can just feel the burden being lifted off of my shoulders. It's a real thing. When you live in a trash neighborhood, you start feeling that, internally. But trash isn't something that we should just start bailing out of the city like we've been doing for so long. Think about the analogy of having a leak in your house, and the leak is overwhelming. It's flooding your house. You wouldn't immediately go out and get bales to bail that water out. You would cut your water supply off. Then you would either fix the leak or you would call someone in to fix it. We have the same analogy with all of this trash that's coming into our communities. We have the ability to stop some of this from coming in. Think about it. When you go to a grocery store, everything is packaged, right? When you buy anything, it's filled with packaging. You get almost as much packaging with items as you do with the food or whatever product that you're buying. We need to find ways to reduce that. The companies are pushing it's called extended producer responsibility. The companies are literally making taxpayers like us pay for their products, the excess packaging. We need to address all of the litter and the waste that's coming into the city, because it's just like the water in your house. You wouldn't just bail it out. And we're spending $100 million a year getting all this stuff out of the city. We can stop doing that. So if I were to spend this money, I would dedicate it to litter cleanup, and I would do community centers. If we had, we've spent $1 billion a year on policing the city. Imagine if we spent $1 billion a year on helping the youth in this city find good jobs and safe places to be and safe places to eat. They could take their clothes there and wash their clothes if they don't have a working, one time I spoke with a teacher who said he literally takes his kids' clothes home to wash them because they don't have clean clothes and they're embarrassed to come to school when they smell bad. We need community centers to give these kids hope. We need to have exciting classes like coding. I think you're going to hear from someone later about coding. Imagine if a kid could, at 7 p.m., go to a community center, play a game of basketball, and then there was a coding class, and they could learn how to code, or they could learn music producing. There was a DJ class or something like that. We need to reach these kids on where they are and how the jobs of the future are going to be. Learning math is great, but the kids want to learn things like coding and things like, music producing. So I would say we got to clean up this city, and there are so many programs that we could institute in the city. I have a list of about 20 of them, and I think that if we implemented most of those ideas, we would save the city about $86 million per year. We are wasting money. We're chasing this flood in our homes instead of cutting off the source of it. We're putting kids into jail instead of providing, we're spending tens of thousands of dollars every year on a kid going to jail. Imagine if we spent that money keeping the kid out of jail. These are where this money should go. We need to reach the youth, and we need to clean up the city. I hear over and over from council members, from the mayor's office, hey, we're a poor city. We can't do that in Philadelphia. Well, that's not an excuse. We need to start implementing these programs that are going to make these differences and stop us from being a poor city. We need to look to the future, and this money really should be what changes the city. And someone said earlier, this is going to be a once in a generation type thing. And I'm glad, council members, that I see on this call that you guys are in charge, because I really have faith that you can do this. And Clean Air Council and all of us on this really want to work with you. So please call us in and ask us about these policy ideas and more specifics. And I'll wrap up in case you've got any questions. And I know you want to hear from the other people, but we have one of the best systems in America. It's called the block captain system. It is being ignored, and I pull my hair out when I talk to council members and say, we can't use it because it's the streets department. No, it is Philadelphia's program. Take it back and use it. Ask these people who are the most dedicated Philadelphians to do something above and beyond what the block captain system currently asks, which is basically nothing. We meet once a year, and that's about it. Ask us, the block captains and the ward, ask the committee people to do more. So take the block captain system back and make it a really robust system. Imagine if we gave an award for the cleanest block, $25,000. You say, hey, cleanest block in Philadelphia, you get $25,000. I can't even explain what my block would do. We would be clean every single day. So I'll let other people go. I know I've talked to so many of you so many times, but I'm always happy to talk to you and give you more ideas.
All right, thank you, Logan. Thank you for your testimony. Let's go to Matt Rader from Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. Matt.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Dom, and members of the committee for being here. We really appreciate the opportunity to testify and all the thought, leadership, and partnership you give to us all year long. I think we all know that Philadelphians face some pretty daunting challenges right now that are exacerbated by COVID. We have surging gun violence, we have 11% unemployment, we have 1 in 5 families food insecure, deep and longstanding poverty, and rising summer heat. These challenges disproportionately impact neighborhoods that are home to majority Black and brown Philadelphians. I'm here to talk about greening, which I believe offers a really powerful, pretty affordable tool to address these challenges and increase equity. And to paraphrase Dr. Ruth Abaya speaking on Radio Times last week, solving these systemic challenges we face will require systemic investment. And I think ARP offers an opportunity to make that investment. My big idea is pretty simple. It is to invest in scaling up 3 systems of neighborhood green infrastructure: cleaned and green vacant lots, healthy tree canopy, and strong community gardens, and leverage these investments to create jobs and small business opportunity across the city. We should focus with the recovery funds in the neighborhoods most impacted by violence, poverty, and inequitable health outcomes. And we must, as always, work in support of residents and community organizations. Data show that this infrastructure investment can significantly reduce violence, create immediate employment, and build community today while transforming health outcomes for the long term. So I propose to you all a Philadelphia Green Equity Initiative to invest an additional $10 million per year on top of current spending to, number 1, make clean and green the standard for all vacant land in Philadelphia, and begin by cleaning and greening 10,000 additional parcels and doubling the number of workforce development positions provided by Philadelphia Land Care. The Land Care Clean and Green treatment, which PHS delivers in partnership with 33 small businesses and community organizations with city funding, reduces gun violence by 29% within half a mile, and reduces feelings of depression by 68% for people living in neighborhoods below the poverty line. Today, Land Care creates about 250 jobs each year, including 75 for returning citizens, and it creates paid work for 33 small businesses and nonprofits, 79% of which are Black or Brown led. And yet, only about a third of Philadelphia's vacant lots are cleaned and green today. I propose investing an additional $6 million per year to significantly increase the number of lots stabilized each year, add new community partners to the program, and create 75 new workforce development positions. Over 5 years, this investment will extend the benefits of Land Care to 10,000 more lots than today. Priority number 2 is to significantly increase tree canopy citywide, starting by doubling the number of trees planted by tree tenders and creating employment opportunities for residents to plant and tend trees. Data show increased tree canopy reduces violent crime, cuts asthma rates, and reduces the urban heat island effect in low canopy neighborhoods. U.S. Forest Service researchers in Philadelphia estimate that achieving 30% tree canopy would prevent 400 premature deaths per year. Our tree canopy today is about 20% and it's declining by 6% over the 10 years to 2018. And in some neighborhoods, it's as low as 2%. I think we should invest $2 million a year to double to 4,000 the number of trees that tree tenders plant each year in their neighborhoods and employ 50 residents to take care of trees through a youth stewardship corps. And then my third priority is community gardens. Establishing community gardens is critical neighborhood infrastructure and strengthening 75 community gardens. Residents across the city invest their sweat equity and their passion to turn vacant land into community gardens that build community, produce food, and remove blight. But there are few support services. Those that are there come from Parks and Rec, from PHS, from Neighborhood Gardens Trust, from Soil Generation, and from other nonprofits that help support this movement. We need to institutionalize these as part of our city's infrastructure. I propose investing $2 million a year to permanently preserve land for an additional 25 gardens and improve infrastructure at 75 gardens across the city. Our purpose as an organization, PHS's purpose, is to use horticulture to advance health and well-being in Philadelphia and the region. We rely on financial support from the city, from our members, and from many others, and we're skilled at bringing those partners together to fund investments in public infrastructure. And we work with a diverse network of volunteers, community organizations, and small businesses to deliver greening services and build green infrastructure in neighborhoods across the city. This Philadelphia Green Equity Initiative will really significantly increase the impact of greening, reducing crime, cooling streets, creating immediate employment, and expanding food access. And this is a true investment that will create an infrastructure that will drive equity far into the future. And we, along with our partners, are very ready to help you make it happen. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Matt Rader. Thank you. I want to recognize Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You know, I had to chime in here as the chair of the Committee on Environment, but also as, someone who has been supportive of the PHS model. I just wanted to say thank you, Matt Rader, so much for your testimony and for really detailing how we can move towards creating equity and building our green infrastructure here in the city of Philadelphia. And for the record, I wanted to drill down on one of the programs you talked about specifically. And, I love them all. You know that already. And you know that I'm a huge fan of us creating additional tree canopy in Philadelphia, because I know that I've shared this with you before, but my mother is from North Philadelphia, from a small street on Cyber Street. There's still no trees on that block to this day. There's no tree canopy there, and typically in those areas, the urban heat island impact is much greater from a temperature perspective than other communities across our city. And that was the reason why in the 70s, my mother moved from North Philadelphia and moved here to Winfield, where I still live, because, in Winfield, we have lots and lots of trees. And she would say, don't cut down the trees. I love it, even if it looks like a jungle around our home. She would say, keep all of our trees. So I want to thank you for bringing up the tree canopy piece. But I wanted to drill down on the workforce development component of what you talked about in the Green Equity Plan, because we recently had a briefing with Senator Casey, and we talked about the forthcoming infrastructure plan, the $2 trillion plan, and we specifically talked about how when we think of infrastructure, we think of hard things, buildings, but in this particular plan, we want to focus on human infrastructure as well. So I thought that was a very interesting concept of human infrastructure versus what we traditionally think of as infrastructure. So because of that, I want to drill down more closely on the Youth Tree Stewardship Corp program that you talked about from an environmental perspective and also from a workforce development perspective. Just for the record, can you give us additional details about that program and some examples of this program that's in operation elsewhere, particularly around the effectiveness of this program for young people?
Okay, so this is a new idea for us, and we have recently received a grant from the Knight Foundation to do a major reforestation effort in Southwest Philadelphia, working in partnership with Bartram's and the community. And there we will pilot this, employing people to help plant trees. So we should have better data a little ways out. We do have good data from our Roots to Reentry work, which trains adults, mostly leaving the prison system, to take jobs with the contractors who maintain vacant lots through the land care program. And I don't have great recidivism data to share with you that's updated, but it is significant improvement. And the vast majority, I think more than 90% of the people we train each year are actually placed in jobs with the contractors who are maintaining vacant lots. So I can certainly share more with you offline, Councilwoman. And I think bringing together this youth employment idea and also employing residents to plant and tend trees is a real opportunity to make this investment in tree canopy infrastructure a co-investment in the human infrastructure. And I actually started my day talking with an employer who employs people to care for trees, and demand for labor to do the job is his greatest constraint. So there is real opportunity here if we can match it. And maybe I could convince Charmaine to work with me also on the youth employment piece. I'm sure I could.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to drill down further there on how we can really collaborate from a workforce development perspective and the environmental perspective, because I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, is to figure out how we create equity in the environmental space by utilizing workforce development as a tool. So can you just talk about that as we continue to think about how this plan will impact Philadelphia? And like I said, I know, in fact, my office is setting up a briefing with the workforce development providers and Senator Casey as additional follow-up from our last meeting. But I just want you to sort of talk about, for the record, why it's important for us to have growth in the workforce development component of our environmental work and as we think about how we create equity in the space.
So the first intuition is that I don't believe that we see trees, clean and green vacant land, and community gardens as part of our infrastructure today. And I think that's to our detriment. So the first intuition is saying where those things are not present, we are missing out on things that materially impact violence, impact livability, and just make life a little better. And so we have to flip from seeing these things as kind of luxuries that we're happy to see where they occur to actually things that should exist, and where they're absent, we've got a problem. That's a huge mindset shift. And then we get to your point, which is if we spend the money to do them, we can then turn all of the vast majority of that spending into dollars to create jobs for local residents, as we do through land care and we'll do through trees, and also for local small businesses and nonprofits. So we have 33 small businesses and nonprofits that work for land care 79% are Black and Brown led. And Landcare has been the work that has helped them scale, become MWBE certified, find new business opportunities. And in the process of managing them as contractors for our work, we're able to provide mentorship, support, connect them to other resources, and get them growing. And we can do the same thing for jobs. We do it already with Landcare. And basically, the more we spend on this infrastructure and the more pervasive it is, the more jobs we can create. And PHS is certainly committed to doing the work in that way so that it directly benefits residents and businesses and nonprofits within those local communities. And I think we can work together on that, and would love to join that briefing if it's still an option.
Absolutely. So I'll definitely, we'll have my team follow up with you on that and anyone who's interested in that briefing. But I just wanted to thank you for presenting this plan, and I'll definitely be following up with you, and thank you all for your work on the subcommittees as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. And our next panelist is David Fair from Turning Points for Children Youth Coalition. Mr. Fair, please state your name for the record and proceed. I think your mute button's on, maybe.
Most people appreciate that when my mute button is on. Good afternoon. My name is David Fair, and I speak today on behalf of the Philly Homes for Youth Coalition, which represents 30 youth-serving agencies, as well as a significant number of youth and young adults with lived experience of homelessness. According to the Pennsylvania Department of Education, during 2019, there were almost 8,000 students in Philadelphia public schools who were homeless, and 2 out of 3 of them were, quote, either living double up with friends or relatives, living in places not for human habitation, or living on the street. A 2020 Penn survey found that among older youth recently or currently in foster care, that is, youth under the protection of the government, 43%, quote, reported COVID-19 as having a negative impact on their living situation, and over 7% were living on the street at the time they were surveyed. Our coalition believes that ARP funds provide a rare opportunity to make significant progress on the affordable and solvable problem of homelessness among young people in Philadelphia. A meaningful investment in a targeted strategy to prevent and resolve youth and young adult homelessness begins with the following 7 urgent priorities. 1, Philadelphia is one of the few major cities that does not have a 24-hour drop-in center for homeless youth and young adults. Accessing the variety of youth services available in the city is made unnecessarily difficult, especially for street homeless youth. A drop-in center would allow our organizations to offer their help in a central location trusted by young people, as well as provide basic help such as showers, food, clothing, etc. 2, our city also fails to appropriately help what are called transition youth. That is, the over 1,400 youth aged 14 to 21 who are in the process of aging out of the foster care and juvenile justice systems, several hundred of whom age out every year directly into homelessness. We recommend creating a Director of Transition Age Youth Services at the Department of Human Services. Such a role would allow DHS to develop stronger accountability and coordinate across systems of care. 3, unfortunately, high caseloads in the community umbrella agency system often interfere with the provision of quality case management services required by older youth. We recommend expanding core capacity by creating a minimum of 3 new full-time transition case manager positions in each core, solely to work with youth 14 and older to assure that they are getting the attention and support necessary for a successful transition from care. 4, also, young people aging out of DHS deserve the case management support of individuals with expertise in working with and accessing services for transition-aged youth. To reduce the number of youth DHS discharges from foster care every year to homelessness, we encourage you to invest stimulus funds in expanding significantly the services of the Achieving Independence Center, operated by Valley Youth House, and LifeSet, operated by my organization, Turning Points for Children, for youth who have left or who are about to leave care. Both programs provide the intensive support these youth desperately need to avoid becoming homeless after discharge. DHS should also increase the age limit for youth in supervised living arrangements, which would reduce homelessness and trauma for this population. 5, peer support programs have been proven effective at engaging any consumer, and programs benefit from respecting the wisdom and skill that comes from lived experience. A successful effort to attack youth homelessness must engage and listen to young people. To do this, it is essential that we start investing in peer support programs as a vital part of our continuum of services. 6, while all of these services are critically needed, nothing would alleviate the increasing rates of youth homelessness more effectively than more youth-specific housing. Providing rental assistance and housing for this group is urgent and can assist not only with the cost of housing, but also by supporting young people in achieving their employment, educational, and savings goals. And finally, 7, we request that stimulus funds be utilized to restore funding for the Philly Homes for Youth Coalition itself. In 2018, OHS specifically identified the coalition as its primary partner to, quote, develop a coordinated response to youth homelessness in the Roadmap to Homes strategic plan. After providing funding to facilitate the coalition up until last fiscal year, this funding was terminated in fiscal 21. We request that coalition funding continue to be provided, at least while the current strategic plan is in the process of being implemented. Thank you for your kind attention and consideration. I've attached additional information to my written testimony, which was previously submitted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank each of you for your testimony, your insight, and your testimony today. We look forward to working with you. And I'm going to ask the clerk, please, to call the next panel of witnesses. And thank you all again for being here today. Thank you very much.
Our next panel will be Taib Smith, Sylvester Mobley, and Michael Algaretti.
Okay, Taib, let's start with Taib first.
Oh, thank you, Council Member Dom. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
So I respectfully, I called our mutual friend David Grasso halfway through this, and I asked him to pray for me, because I believe, if I'm correct, Miss Charmaine is the only African American who spoke as of yet before me. Is that correct?
Possibly.
Possibly? I need a fact checker. Can we get somebody from CNN or somebody from a reputable journalistic organization other than the Inquirer to fact check this? But just to say on message, because I don't need to look at talking points. I can speak from the heart, and I can speak as a third-generation Philadelphian whose grandfather moved up here in 1923. And if you know, 1919 was the Red Summer, when all over the country there were riots, white riots, where they were killing African Americans. And most often we only talk about Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. But there has been white violence against Black people just for speaking honestly like I'm going to today, or for owning a printing press, or for having a license to be an undertaker. And after all of the international embarrassments that Philadelphia received when the city had, I think, 3 uprisings, multiple police scandals, when I think of some of my colleagues who preceded me and some of my colleagues who are going to be after me, I have to ask some of my elders, some of my ancestors, some of my friends to pray for me, because I know I can be a very polarizing figure in the business community. Traditionally, African-American business people, I would say since the Nixon generation, have had a myth that there's an alliance with white power. We don't speak from a space of Black liberation. And that is not how I was raised as a third generation Philadelphia. So although I have heard my friend Bruce Katz, who wrote a brilliant book with Jeremy Novak called The New Localism, that talks about how we should think of not just cities, but regions, right? So in Philadelphia, we have a Chamber of Commerce who's going to go after me, that is a 13-county chamber, right? And although many of my colleagues have spoke rhetorically about structural racism and all the reasons why we have a 10x differential in wealth between white households and black households, they have not spoken about their boards, their trustees, their own investment packages, and what they're doing to do restitution to the intentionality of why we have the differentials in access, health, and wealth. And if we think about the Philadelphia region, in Philadelphia, approximately $13,000 is spent in spaces where black children live, right? And we have a reading level for third graders at approximately 30%. And in the western suburbs, it's between 23,000 to 30,000. And if you go to private school, it can be between 35 to, God knows what. And when you and I first met, you told me a story about how you first got into real estate. All right. And I'll ask you to share that later, or anyone can interview about that. But I believe you got into real estate because you were inspired because there was a WASP gentleman, I would assume, who excluded your family from living in the western suburbs, right? The same western suburbs where my fiance's family lived. And my family has been held in shackles of structural racism that is intentional, right? Because there are organizations like the Society of Odd Fellows in Philadelphia that had a rule that if you were a mason or a craftsman and you taught an African-American child, you would never work again. Right? My dad's friend, Bilal Kalyoun, I shared that story with him because I read in The Past, Present, and Future of Philadelphia. It's a book that was written about 100, it was written in the 90s, but it's about a gentleman about 100 years ago. And it describes that in the intentionality of excluding the African Americans who were moving here in the Great Migration, when Philadelphia was defined as New Jerusalem because there were more African American free people here for many reasons, right? There were expats who were Haitians who moved here during the Toussaint uprisings, who were the barbers and the caterers of wealthy whites. And they were able to make a very good living, and they lived free here. So African Americans have lived here since William Penn founded this city, yet only 2.3%, maybe 2.5% of the businesses are owned by African Americans. And I've had to suffer through colleagues, frankly, who gaslit me, and I've given them free labor, right, on this lineup. Like Bill Goldier. And Bill, I will say honestly to you publicly that I gave a year of free labor to United Way for your analysis of the black and brown business ecosystem. I was one of the only African Americans on that task force or whatever it was called. And you didn't show up to one meeting, and you didn't even thank the people who gave you the free labor, right? And most of the comments you said today were the work of people like Michael Banks, right? And then there's so many people throughout these ecosystems. And I'm going to wrap up.
Here's what I'd like you to think about. This is the goal for today.
Let me just finish one thing. There are people like Sylvie Howard, who's no longer in the city, Harold Epps, who was supposed to be on this lineup, Deshaun Hines at the Global Identity Project. There are Black and brown women across institution, public-private partnership, and corporation who have to carry bullet points for white people who do not want to change their privilege. And frankly, it's disrespectful that there hasn't been a Pacific Islander, an Asian, a Native American, or an immigrant, a person of immigrant descent, because these economies are exploitation of labor, right? And I, as a person who's benefited from understanding capitalism, know that most of these workforce development programs have never done a thing for a person like me. All right, so I want to be respectful to this audience, right? And I want to also say that I've had to temper what I actually want to express because of the amount of free labor I've given to the city, I've given to philanthropic organizations, and I've given to nonprofits that are led by white people who make a very good living off of poverty pimping in the biggest poor Black city in the United States. And respectfully, I'm going to turn to my brother, Sylvester Mobley, who's also invested in African-American and women entrepreneurs such as myself, and who I have worked with for the last 7 years approximately, and who's also been gaslit by most of this lineup. So with that, I'm open to questions after the rest of the people. And we should really think about this lineup, right? And we should think about what our neighborhoods look like. And we should think about the fact that this city is 67% POC, BIPOC, and 43% Black, right? And there are people who are more intelligent than me, who might not have my male privilege or my bravado, who have done work, and I sit on their shoulders today when I speak. And I'm tempering the rage of this city. And the only reason some of you have had a come to Jesus moment or even thinking about African-American entrepreneurs or women or BIPOC communities, because there's new mandates from Wall Street to corporate America to invest in us. And most of you are trying to figure out JV partnerships to get access to the money. And you're just pivoting old programs from the 70s and 80s and not investing in people like me. Thank you.
All right, Tahi, thank you for your honesty. And we'll come back to you with some questions. And let's go to Sylvester Mobley from Coded by Kids.
Council members, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm Sylvester Mobley, CEO of Coded by Kids. Also want to say, I don't know if it's fair to go after Taib. I think next time we want to think about the lineup.
Undefeated, my brother.
So as we think about how this money gets spent, any conversations that we have about the money, we do have to have an honest conversation with ourselves about the fact that the things we've done in the past have not worked. That's not an opinion, that's an objective. If you look at data around inequity in the city of Philadelphia, what we've done has not worked. So we have to start there and be honest with ourselves. And that's not to cast blame, that's not to point the finger, that's to have an appropriate starting point for what we need to do to move forward. And within that, we've had a lot of conversations about poverty. People have talked about workforce development. One of the consistent problems that we've had as a city is we treat poverty as if poverty is the problem. Poverty is not the problem. Poverty is a symptom of deeper ingrained systemic problems. We take an approach where we essentially act like a doctor who's treating a cancer patient, and we give them painkillers to treat the pain, but never actually address the cancer. That's what we do year after year when we're addressing poverty and treating poverty as if it's the problem. At some point, we do need to back up and start looking at what drives poverty. One of the main things that we see is racial inequity, and address that. As an example, 41% of Black males who grow up rich will end up either lower middle class or poor in their outcomes. So you're talking about half of Black males who grew up rich are ending up either lower middle class or poor. They're not ending up that way because they were poor, because that's not where they started. They're ending up that way because of the role that racial inequity plays. If you start to think about how that plays a role in poverty, our programs only help people once they're poor. We don't do anything to help people and keep them where they are. If you have almost half of Black males who are being pushed down the ladder, If you look at, just socioeconomic data for Black families, if you're hemorrhaging more Black people from the middle class, then our programs are actually moving into the middle class, which when you look at the data, our programs aren't moving many people into the middle class. If we're honest about what's happening, we've created an unsolvable problem. We can't actually solve poverty if you have more people moving into poverty than people you're moving out. So at some point, we do need to be honest and take a step back and start to think about how do we address the drivers and the roots of the problem, and recognizing that things like workforce development, in its current state hasn't worked. Councilman Dom, we've had enough conversations. I always push for tech. How do we move as many Black and brown people in the city into tech? We have to focus on the spaces that we know are growing, the opportunities that we know are going to be there. I have a lot of conversations with people running workforce development programs, and time again, when I look at the jobs they're training people for, you can match those jobs up on a list of jobs that are currently being replaced by automation. So it's hard to make the argument to me that a workforce development program is helping someone if that job will not exist in 5 years. You've basically given someone something for today, knowing it's going to go away and that person is going to be in the exact same position that they were in today. The space that has that opportunity, the space that has the ability to move people forward and keep them where they are, is the tech and innovation space. But we're not doing enough to move Black and brown people in the city of Philadelphia into that space. When we talk about entrepreneurship, whenever we talk about entrepreneurship in the context of Black and brown people, it's always in the vein of small business. I'm in the tech space. We're talking about how do you raise venture capital, how do you build high growth scalable companies. We never have those conversations when we're talking about Black and brown people. I think it's a missed opportunity for the city to not have a deliberate focus on how do we move Black and brown people into the startup space so that they're building scalable, high-growth companies. We have to, at some point, shift the way we think, shift the way we look at these things, and recognize and accept that if we're not able to move our Black and brown people into the tech and innovation space in a meaningful way, we're not actually going to solve these problems. We're just going to keep committing resources, time, committing funds to things, and just keep spinning our wheels. So I'm gonna stop there and yield to. I know there's another gentleman coming after me.
All right, thank you, Sylvester, and let's go to Michael Allegretti with Rubicon.
Well, Chairman Dom, thank you very much. Vice Chair O'Neill, thank you for having me today. Wow, we saved the fourth panel for the incredibly impactful panel. I'm not a member of the Philadelphia civic community, so I've been listening to this hearing now for, now going on three hours and getting a great education in the city. Taib and Sylvester, thank you for your comments, because they'll inform my remarks now to a certain degree. I'm going to take things in a somewhat different direction. And I do want to say, we are honored to be invited to talk to you about how the city can consider deploying some of this federal money, particularly around technology, and particularly with a focus towards sustainability, resiliency, and equity. And I'll try to kind of touch on what those themes mean for our product and our business. So my name is Michael Allegretti. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at a company called Rubicon. And I think to date, so far on the panel, there haven't really been a lot of for-profit companies talking. And what I'm going to try to do in the next 5 minutes is basically tell you what the heck Rubicon is, because I'm assuming that most of you don't know our company or our product. And then tell a story about one city close by, Baltimore, how they used it to transform an important public service. And it's the service of waste, right? Picking up the garbage and the recycling, and what the pandemic meant for that department. So my focus is really on government efficiency, taxpayer savings, and delivering equitable service regardless of zip code. And then I could just leave you with some thoughts generally about how, from my perspective or our perspective, you might want to think about deploying some portion of this money towards technology. What are kind of the themes you might want to consider, regardless of which tech you use. So just quickly on Rubicon, we are a software company that provides technology solutions specifically for waste and recycling. We have customers in business and in government. On the business side, we're servicing the waste and recycling needs of most of the nation's leading brands, whether it's a Starbucks and an Apple store, or whether it's a Dollar General, which some of you might know or not know, or a Wawa store or 7-Eleven as an example. And we also work with about 55 cities now across the United States. We're a B Corp. That means we're essentially a social enterprise. So we're focused, of course, as a for-profit business on doing well, but we also have a mission to work in partnership with government and to do more than simply deliver a good bottom line. The company's mission is to end waste. And what that primarily means, of course, is keeping materials out of landfills. And Councilman Gilmore Richardson will be familiar with the need to do that, create more circularity in communities and in supply chains. But we look at that mission of waste reduction much more broadly, particularly with cities. We say, where are the opportunities for cities to reduce wasted time, wasted tax dollars, wasted public labor, wasted human potential? So it's a holistic look. 4 years ago, we launched a product called Rubicon Smart City. That is our offering for cities. And the goal is simple. How do we help our city partners run smarter, faster, and more effective waste recycling and fleet operations? We built it on the Amazon Web Services platform, and I'll go back to why that's important. It's the notion of being on a cloud-based platform and having a cloud-based solution so that you have maximum flexibility with the technology. It has to be secure, reliable, intuitive, but you as a city if you're going to invest in any tech, you want flexibility. What does the tech do? And then I'll kind of go into an example. It does some really basic stuff, but it's stuff that I believe is very important to the functioning of a city and to creating good quality of life regardless of zip code. It ensures that every resident's trash and recycling is picked up when it's scheduled to be picked up. There are no missed pickups, and that every neighborhood is getting that same level of service. It documents important quality of life issues, which lead to communities kind of deteriorating over time if they're not addressed. Whether that's litter, bulky waste, illegal dumping, it sees that at the source, it photographs that, and it lets you action that before it becomes a larger problem. It focuses on reducing contamination in your recycling stream. This matters for environmental justice reasons and simply for economic reasons. If you can have a cleaner recycling stream, you as a city can command a better and better price getting those recyclable commodities for sale into the secondary market. It reduces costs overall in your municipal operation, whether it's fewer vehicle miles traveled, which matter for things like emissions and wear and tear and safety, or whether it's ensuring that your trucks are in better shape. And finally, I'll say this point again, it ensures equity across zip codes. Every neighborhood in any city, whether it's Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, it doesn't matter. You have to be providing the same level of service to every citizen, and technology platforms can provide you that line of sight. There's one other thing, and I think this might resonate both for the panelists as much as the council. We look at these trucks and we say, you as a city have invested inordinate amounts of money in your solid waste vehicles and all these various fleet vehicles that you have, and particularly your garbage trucks, your street sweepers. They're going up and down every street of the city at least once a week. You can do more with them than just pick up the trash. Could you look for things in the community that need to be remediated? Graffiti, potholes, broken curb cuts, these kind of quality of life issues. And if you can get ahead of those, if you could spot those before the citizen calls to complain or before they become a crisis, suddenly your city is now in the business of delivering proactive government. And that's really the gold standard. And especially if you do that in the neighborhoods beyond just the city center. So now to some of a story and then some thoughts about how to think about technology deployment. So you have a once-in-a-generation opportunity here with this federal money to make long-term investments, but they have to be ones that ultimately can pay for themselves, right? You can't, do something and then a year later, where are the funds for it? So you have to think about ROI very thoughtfully. And I think every panelist today, the subsequent panels as well, has alluded to that. But, nailing the basics is a thing, right? So smart, efficient, reliable service that doesn't discriminate based on zip code is important. It's important for citizen satisfaction, but it also, as we saw from the pandemic, has a big public health component to it. And it has an environmental component. If you're trying to reach zero waste goals, you need to be focusing on technology deployments that get you towards zero waste. But there's the public worker as well, and this is has been lost in the pandemic. So there was a universal truth during this pandemic, and that is the trash still needs to get picked up. And the men and women who are doing that work, they're kind of unsung heroes. These are frontline workers who came to work every day during the pandemic. They did before, they will after. And it has been harder and harder for these departments, solid waste departments, not just in Philly, across the country, to maintain staffing levels and to maintain the quality of service that they need as the city grows. So what happened in COVID, men and women kept coming to work, but over time, quickly, those numbers started to dwindle due, unfortunately, to COVID deaths, exposure, contact tracing. And next thing you knew, cities needed to start cutting recycling programs, pulling back on services. The trash was up. And Councilmember Gilmore Richardson wrote a really thoughtful op-ed about this issue. And I think you as Philadelphians, I'm a New Yorker, we kind of have similar challenges. So we focused on this. In the Baltimore example, I'll just tell you what happened there. Baltimore was having a similar problem. And in August of 2020, Baltimore suspended curbside recycling programs. They couldn't get the math to work anymore, and they had labor shortages. Residents obviously said, well, yeah, we have to keep our sanitation workers safe, but they were also very unhappy to see all of their recyclable material headed to a landfill. So in fall of 2020, Baltimore actually used what was then the COVID relief fund, so a federal funding stream. They purchased our technology, purchased any technology that would work for you. And they did a few things. They digitized their routes. So they got paper out of the process and immediately started to get cost savings. They improved their routes, right? So they made their routes smarter and basically cost less money. And most importantly, in January of 2021, so not long after, about 6 months later, they fired up their recycling program again. So there was a public labor win, there was an environmental win. Mayor Brandon Scott said, this technology got us to digitize our routes and finally allow us to deliver this effective service. So it can happen. And I think the main takeaway from Baltimore is it can happen quickly. And so, as you say to yourself as a council and as a city, how do you want to invest this money? Everyone has a different thing that they're pushing for. So I can only speak from the technology perspective. I think some good principles are flexibility, agility, real ROI, and quick deployment. So you ask yourself, will a technology investment create more optionality and flexibility for our city in the future? Cloud-based platforms, Rubicon is one, there are many out there. They are purpose-built, they are by design portable, so they allow for that sort of flexibility and adjustment over the long haul. Ask yourself, is a given solution financially sustainable and quickly deployable, or is it going to blow holes in your future budgets? Is it going to take years to demonstrate ROI and to get deployed? Again, SaaS technology, software as a service technologies, like Rubicon, there are others. They are generally more affordable. They can generally be deployed in a matter of weeks versus months or years, and their cost can be fixed, right? If I'm sitting in your shoes, I want to know, tell me what the price is, and I want to see that price over the long term, and ideally be able to fund it very clearly with the savings that I get from that deployment. So I'll stop there. I'm very honored to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I want to thank the panel. I have a question for Sylvester. Sylvester, I think you and I involved with maybe 20 or 25 high schools over the last few years, where we had, I think it was in the 10th grade, 15 students in the 10th, and then we went to 11th and 12th, and you were teaching them tech and coding. Can you give me an idea of the results of that and the benefits?
So based on those programs, more than 80% have gone on to college. So we now have our first groups that are coming up on their senior years, so we'll start to see what the college graduation rates look like. For us, the next step is always higher education. There's a lot of debates about should kids go directly into college or not, is college worth it? There's a couple of things that get missed in those debates. One, there is data that shows a Black person going into tech without a college degree will do worse than their white counterparts. Knowing that, the question we always have to ask ourselves is are we putting them at a disadvantage if we don't prepare them for higher education? The other part to it is we've historically done a poor job at preparing Black and brown kids for higher education. And then we throw our hands up and say, well, maybe higher education isn't for everyone. We feel like it's our responsibility to prepare them and then let that decision be driven by them instead of us driving the decision because we won't prepare them for it. The other thing that when we talk about is the degree worth it, Black people are currently concentrated in the college majors with the lowest return on its investment. So there's a concentration in the lowest paying college majors. In the college majors that have the highest return on investment, we're not present at all. So we also do let's make sure you're going into majors like computer science, software engineering, MIS. So we're at about 80% with the young people who have gone through those programs. With
Sylvester, can I just add a little color to what you're saying? So Alan, of venture capital investment thus far, only 2% has gone to Black people, women, and people of color. But men who are born in certain census tracts who benefit from having aunts and uncles who can do a family round have good and bad ideas where they live off of the capital investment. So whether the idea is good or bad, they eat off of the fees and they're able to make very good livings, while Black and brown entrepreneurs who come through ecosystems like Sylvester's or programs like my own at the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship or IFLAB, which works in tandem with Coded by Kids, oftentimes the people they have to pitch to don't have the cultural competency to understand the products and services that they're attempting to provide for their own communities or for society writ large. And I'll just end with the average white person is approximately 57 in the United States. The average Asian and African American is 26, and the average Latinx or Hispanic is 9. So corporations have an understanding of that from an extractive capital exploitation perspective. But I've heard many ideas today about putting people in a system of workforce development to get them as a part of the labor economy. But I've heard very few that are trying to put them in incubators, accelerators, or programs like Coded by Kids or IFLAB or the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship to give people the opportunity to scale up and be a part of the larger capital economy.
Let me ask you both a question, because I've been talking about this for 5 or 6 years, I think. I can't figure out why I can't get traction on it. Why are we not teaching mandatory from pre-K to 12th grade financial literacy, technology, and entrepreneurship?
So thank you for that, Alan. And I'm sorry to cut you off. You were going to jump in, Sylvester. But Alan, you and I went on a road show, and I met 5 or 6 bankers. And through that, and I won't call those bankers out now, but most of those people either didn't have a solution or an answer for why, since the CRA Act of 1976, why they have capital investment products that are extractive capital in Black communities, yet they don't have proven best practices with KPIs or performance indicators that benefit Black communities, right? So unbeknownst to most people, most Black men and women that you know who work at a bank work in PR, community communications, or they're on the CRA side, right? In capital investments, only 1% of all the capital investment and wealth management in the United States is invested in Black-owned capital companies, right? So you might know, I don't know if you remember, I know you're a busy man, but I have another venture called The Collective, right? We have 8 members in The Collective, right? We're attempting to raise $100 million to invest in Black and brown communities, right? We all went through a roadshow on opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are for rural and urban communities and redline communities, but they are a capital product for the benefit of capital gains tax. How many Black and brown people living in Philadelphia are making capital gains tax or even understand a capital gains tax financial product? So we are undergirded in a system that has yet to give us restitution to all of the products and services and public policy that have undergirded us in the shackles of white structured inequality.
So I think my answer is a lot simpler than Taib's. We haven't had the will to invest in those programs. Alan, you and I, Councilman Dom, you and I have had quite a few conversations about those why we can't do it, or the need for it. Those programs require funding. We have to recognize that we're at the point that we're at because of intentional disinvestment in Black and brown communities, systems that serve Black and brown people, programs that serve Black and brown people. You can't solve disinvestment with more disinvestment. There has to be the financial commitment, the financial investment in the programs. And up to this point, and you and I have worked on raising money to fund these programs. So as well as anyone else, it's tough to get people to commit. It's tough to get people to invest in it. And there's all kinds of reasons. What about the school district this, and what about that? But the reality is it all amounts to the same thing. We're just not investing in these programs. We're refusing to fund it.
Okay. I think Taib had his hand up. Thank you, Sylvester.
Mm-hmm. So Alan, unless honestly, unless people look at their capital stack, unless they look at their partners, unless they think about who they're going to sunset their company to, who they're mentoring, right, who their trustees are, if we're not looking at exit strategies for institutions that have been structurally racist, but have yet to ever pay restitution to the Black and brown people who undergird the pension funds of the city, right? So during COVID, there were more billionaires created than in a generation, right? And most of that came from investments in real estate, investment in technology. And if you look at the people who were still working throughout the pandemic in the neighborhood that I live in, I'm fortunate enough to live in, that historically African-American community where it's only 3% African-American today, most of the people who I saw keeping the city alive were Black or brown. In the gig economy, in healthcare, and the labor unions, and those are the pension funds that undergird the capital investments of this whole economy, right? And so unless we change the public policy and put guardrails on some type of metrics that benefit the demography of the people who undergird the pension funds of the city, we are going to stay in the situation that we are.
I just want to go to Councilmember Green, my colleague, and he had a question. Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the panelists for this panel, and I'm going to ask the question I asked earlier in reference to the dollars coming to the city of Philadelphia from the American Rescue Plan. And you may have heard my question, but I'm going to restate it. And I think it ties into the commentary that was made by both Mr. Smith and Mr. Mobley. And my concern when we receive these dollars, that once again we'll probably sprinkle dollars to a lot of different initiatives, but will not make transformational impact. And my concern is that because of the challenges and some of the things that have been spoken about in this panel specifically, dollars were provided to say this program, that program. And I think this ties into what Mr. Mobley was saying, that we'll keep putting money into the same programs, but we don't have a real impact. And so we don't really leverage the dollars like we could, especially as it comes to economic development. And so when we talk about entrepreneurship or just wealth for communities of color, that's something that's not discussed. And I think part of that is because the vast majority of people in the public sector have really no experience or background with entrepreneurship. I've been beating my head against the wall regarding the lack of investment for businesses. And so what'll happen is if I talk about entrepreneurship and businesses, especially businesses of color, and want to devote resources to that, others will say, well, what about this type of program where we should give this person some money for this program or even direct income? Which, yes, that from a policy perspective will circulate dollars for a period of time and will generate some economy and some resources and have what I would say a sugar rush. But long term, does that really provide the benefit? So I'm curious from your perspective in reference to, and I don't want to make assumptions of what I think the budget address will be on Thursday, but considering how we traditionally have done things, I will hold out hope, but that hope, to be quite honest, is fleeting because I have a perspective of what will end up happening, and there will be some dollars allocated to a lot of different things to say we're doing something, but really won't have any transformational impact. And then we'll get to 2025 after all the dollars had been spent by December of 2024, and we'll ask, where are we? And we've got some of the same issues and challenges we've had before. So I'm curious about the idea of spending dollars either through direct income or financial benefit programs versus making real investments in a transformational way in reference to just wealth for people who have moderate low income.
Yeah, I think it's always a question of what are you actually solving for? And this is something I ask a lot because people will say, well, we want to make transformational change, but then they direct dollars to the same types of programs you've always done. So then it's like, well, are you really solving for transformational change or are you solving for something else? Because that's not where the money is going to. If you think about the impact that providing real investment capital, one of the reasons, we're currently raising a $50 million pre-seed and seed stage venture capital fund is because of the direct impact that has. Like if you think about the impact that providing real investment capital would have for Black and brown people who are starting scalable tech and tech-driven companies in the city of Philadelphia, if you look at the Bay Area, there's companies that when they exit, the companies create so many millionaires because of those exits that it inflates the real estate market. Like imagine the impact that would have in the city of Philadelphia with Black and brown people having major exits from scalable companies. Like that's a huge ROI on that investment capital. Like that is transformative change. Imagine getting to a point where Black kids are on a basketball court talking about whose brother just raised their Series A or whose, mom's company had an exit. That is transformative change right there. But we have to be willing to think outside of the normal context that we've traditionally thought in. If I had to advocate for where that money would go, it would go to things like that would drive that real, truly transformative change in the city of Philadelphia.
And
if I could just interject for a second, Councilmember Green.
Real quick, Mr. Smith, I'll let you jump in, but I think that perspective is so key in reference transformational because I remember Palo Alto and Stanford was, okay, it's a nice school, but that Silicon Valley wasn't Silicon Valley like we now know because of all those exit dynamics and investments in other entrepreneurial ventures, which then attracted the same people and were investing in the same type of businesses over and over again and not different type of businesses that come from people who are Black and brown.
I mean, Philadelphia has an opportunity right now to become the center of truly equitable innovation for the country. People tend to come to where they can raise capital. If we very intentionally ensure that there is investment capital for underrepresented founders, for Black and brown founders, we then have the ability to attract people from, throughout the country because now they're coming here to raise capital and build companies. Like imagine what it does for the city and what that turns the city into.
So, Sylvester, if I could jump in for a second, Councilmember Green, Sylvester brings up a very good point. In business, people invest in teams more than they invest in the idea, right? So there's many startups that started out with one MVP, minimal viable product, but what they do today is not where they started. And you mentioned one of the problems in talking about entrepreneurship versus workforce development in the Philadelphia region is that honestly, regardless of color or class, we have a lot of people who are speaking in regards to their relationships and how they monetize the programs at the municipal, federal, and state level. And also they're speaking on in terms of bullet points of lobbying organizations that and think tanks that do not represent the most marginalized or the parity of the demography of the city. All right. So when someone is looking at a capital asset investment or they're looking at a market, they're looking at the team. They're looking at our executive. They're looking at our council. They're looking at our region. They're looking at how our region communicates with our suburbs, right? And if it's not a good investment opportunity, capital is an international product. They're going to invest in another team. And what you articulated was we have an intergenerational relationship with people who are exploiting poverty through the programs of servicing the poor. And we need to recenter and refocus and think about our ecosystem writ large and think about how to move the paradigm in regards to the quality of life of the people who lived in the most marginalized communities versus extractive capitalism models that are just displacing them to Chester, to Delaware County, to Montgomery County. And if you look at the numbers from Brookings Institution to Dr. Keegan Taylor, who wrote Race for Profit at Princeton University, who I believe lives in the region, there is data that shows that poverty is rising in the suburbs, right? And then those people still have to commute into the city. And we're not improving the quality of life, not just of our urban cores, but of our regions and of our nations. And if we do not look holistically about how to improve the quality of life of the most marginalized, we are going to continually see an uptick in violence. And if you look around the world, violence is directly related to being dislocated from the 21st century economy.
All right, thank you, Taib. Councilmember Green, any other questions?
No, thank you very much.
I want to thank you, each witness, for being here today. Thank you all, and thanks for your insight. Very informative, and we appreciate your testimony today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And I'll ask the clerk to call our last panel of witnesses.
Thank you. Our last panel today is William Carter, Zach Wilcha, and Eric Diaz.
Right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Councilman. First, let me say this conversation has been incredible. And I'm glad that you called this hearing, obviously, to talk about the use of the federal stimulus dollars, but we're talking about inclusive growth here and how we can, as a city of Philadelphia, do that. And honestly, I wish this was in prime time. More people need to hear this on a prime network channel, particularly here in Philadelphia. So I'm going to be joined by Paul Levy of the City District, Steve Mullen of eConsult, and Stuart Weintraub of Chamberlain Law, and Drew Vanderbilt of Grant Thornton, who are part of the Chamber's State and Local Tax Committee. But before I share my screen, hearing some of the commentary that I've heard so far, just a little bit about myself. I'm Vice President of Local Government Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce. Although my great-grandfather from North Philadelphia, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. And when I was 14, I benefited from an internship and summer job, and I actually worked in politics at the Virginia State Capitol for Lawrence Douglas Wilder, who was the lieutenant governor at the time, but became the first Black African-American governor in the nation. So I fully endorse Charmaine Matlock-Turner and UAC's Summer Jobs Program. That experience propelled me throughout my career, and I still work in politics to this day. So it was so important, and I really didn't want to do it. Actually, I cried and told my mother I didn't want to do it. She made me write the letter and submit it, and they selected me, and it was the best experience of my life up to that point. So it's so important because kids don't dream about what they've never seen, and that helped me out. So I ended up majoring in political science at Hampton University, HBCU, located in Hampton, Virginia, and I moved to Philly, full circle coming back to Philadelphia for law school at Temple. And I concentrated in intellectual property and entertainment law. Why? Because Philadelphia had a more robust entertainment industry than Richmond, Virginia did. And it was close to New York. So that in itself talks about why people move to certain areas. That's where the industry they want to be a part of is. If it's more robust there, then, that's part of your decision-making process. So after law school, I started a management company. I worked in a couple of record labels in New York during the time I was in law school. My brother, who's a music producer, I moved him up here. And I will say it was difficult to grow the business. Without the supports, and I wasn't as involved in Philadelphia politics as I am now. And I just know that it was difficult for us to grow that business in the environment here at that time. So ended up a couple of years doing that and ended up working back in politics, working for city council because I had that experience from the jump. And also my brother moved to Los Angeles where the industry is more cultivative of entertainers and entertainment producers out there. And he's doing very well out there. He's been 5-time Grammy nominated since he's moved to Los Angeles 5 years ago. But that's, once again, that industry attracts people to come there, just like we want to attract industry here to attract more businesses to come here and work. So worked in city council, 16 years for who is currently the city council president. A lot of similarities. I say there's a lot of politics and entertainment, and certainly a lot of entertainment in politics. So I will say that there are similarities. And so ultimately, I ended up doing a lot in city council and, working when we're talking about using some of these funds for, some of the things we're talking about using these funds for, we sued the state government for local control of guns. I co-authored the legislation that requires EOPs on all city contracts, along with a city attorney named Howard Rye, who's since passed. I helped establish the Philadelphia Energy Authority, which has a very successful clean energy jobs program and hiring a lot of city residents and internships and in full-time jobs thereafter, and helped produce events through the business that brought the business and public sector together to increase work opportunities and entrepreneurship opportunities. So I would just say that I know what we must do. I have a good idea what we must do, and that's work together to make our city safer, to offer more summer jobs, to train people for the jobs of today, like the gentleman was just expressing, to attract industry and to fuel inclusive job and business growth. So with that, I'm going to move to sharing my screen, if I can do that here. Let's see. Paul, are you able to share your screen, Paul?
Yeah, I'll share.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be coming up right now.
Okay.
I told Paul that might happen. So he was right on time. So what we're talking about in Philadelphia at the Chamber of Commerce is an inclusive growth budget. I indicated that I started working, I don't know if I indicated that, but I started working with the Chamber of Commerce in 2019. Into 2019 as local government affairs director and also vice president, I should say, and also did a lot of work with the road growth, which was the chamber being more intentional about going into neighborhoods, sports, neighborhoods, and about this through any company or nonprofit. And I've been able to see their perspective. 60 years of that's a lot of people trying to think of the and work together. Certainly, obviously, that happens. So next slide. We're talking inclusive of the youth. One of the a number of things. We can help reduce gun violence. We can enhance cleanliness and safety in all neighborhoods. We can spur the expansion of Black and brown businesses, which is very important. Revitalize commercial quarters throughout our city and create an atmosphere that will allow companies from all demographics to grow, as well as attract new companies, thereby putting more Philadelphians back to work. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Paul Levy, who will go through the next part, and then I will come back on and talk about some of where we believe some of the resources should go. So, Paul, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Will, and Paul Levy from the Center City District. I think the core point here is that for decades, we've had to use a greater share of our locally generated resources to deal with the unacceptably high poverty rate in the city. And what the American Rescue Plan does is provide direct payments to millions of Americans with reduced incomes. It provides job benefits. Many people spoke about this, but it also includes a significant effort to reduce childhood poverty through an expansion of tax credits and a broadening of the Affordable Care Act. So there will be more income directly in people's pockets before we think about spending the $1.4 billion. But this $1.4 billion, as I think many people said, can, over the next several years, restore the severe cuts that were made to the operating budget last June, fund many new initiatives that address racial and income disparities and gun violence, at the same time as we can make new quality of life and economic development investments that prompt more expansive and equitable and inclusive growth. Just to be clear, you heard this before. In 2020, those of you in City Council had to make the painful decision to cut $164 million out of the budget. There was another $75 million that was saved through refinancing, but you also, as you heard Harvey Rice from PICA talk about, had to draw down funds from budget stabilization and had to really draw on a lot of rainy day funds. The core assumption of this work, which the Chamber has done, CCD has done, as well as the Philadelphia Equity Alliance all coming together, is that number one is to restore those cuts. So if you restore all those cuts, that's about $398 million that would be spent on that. But assuming you want to spend half of this money in the next year, that leaves $302 million to program. And many people have asked, how should those expenditures be made? This is just a visual summary of the cuts that were made across multiple departments, plus the additional commitment that was made from the city's general fund to public education. So all of those to the right were cuts that needed to be made. And here's the history I think that we have a chance to break away from. Pre-pandemic, the city was spending 50% of its operating budget on dealing with crime, public safety, social services, and poverty. Half of the budget was spent there. Another 23% was spent on pension liabilities and employee benefits. That left 10% of the city's budget to go to economic development, quality of life, parks, streets, sanitation, and then there was a special 3% that was put into education. In the last 20 years, what we have seen is a steady decline in city investment in economic development, job development, black and brown business development, culture and recreation expenditures, as we've had to spend more and more on meeting basic needs and reducing poverty. From 1996 to 2010, the city spent between 0.5% and 1% of general fund expenditures lowering the wage and business tax. That contracted to 0.1% for after the recession. And most recently, last year, all of those were frozen and the wage tax on suburban residents went up. And the basic calculation is if just 15% of those suburban residents who work in the city choose not to come back, that's a loss of $120 million a year. So we have a lot at risk at this point. And so together, I think, working the Chamber, the Philadelphia, the Equity Alliance, and ourselves, I'll turn it back to Will to talk about the recommendation of how to spend that available funds.
All right, thank you, Paul. Much appreciated. So the Chamber, along with outside business interests, are really pushing for an equity and growth budget and usage of the federal dollars for this purpose to reduce gun violence through programs such as summer youth jobs, as I discussed earlier, group violence prevention, longer-term community safety policing initiatives, $50 million. Spur minority business growth. A lot of the comments that were made earlier are very, very on point, and we must be inclusive in our efforts all together if we're going to make our city the city that we know it can be. So spurring minority business growth, growing black and brown businesses, regenerating, revitalizing neighborhood commercial corridors, and new supplier diversity initiatives, $90 million. And strengthening the land bank for affordable housing, which is something that I know Councilman Sanchez has been very much about at $10 million. And I cannot forget to mention Councilwoman Parker and her efforts in revitalizing commercial corridors throughout the city with their Taking Care of Business program. That is something we would love to see further enhanced, and any further initiatives on top of that to help our commercial corridors. So next, we're talking about a citywide business and job growth. Jump-starting conventions and tourism and restoring hotel jobs. That's very important. The Chamber has been involved in the Ready Set Philadelphia initiative, or Ready Set Philly initiative, along with City Council and the Mayor's office. And we want to make sure that people know that it's safe to come back, and the city is ready to come back. I heard Baltimore mentioned earlier, and I know Councilman Green talks about this often, that they run radio commercials and their placards on city buses that talk about come to Baltimore right now. We're ready. And so we really need to jumpstart what we're doing in the region and saying that our city is safe to come back to. Obviously, we must be safe as the vaccine rolls out. But we also want to make sure that we're being proactive in promoting Philadelphia as, if not one of the safest cities throughout in regards to COVID-19. Citywide business retention and attraction, very important. One of the things that another thing I should say that I've learned more about after my 16 years of working in city council is that when people talk about competitiveness, I used to hear people say, listen, I have people competing to put food on the plate. What are we trying to fuel competitiveness? And what we're really saying is that we're trying to attract more jobs to this city. And other cities are kicking our butts in terms of attracting more businesses and jobs to their cities. So we want to create industry. It doesn't have to be the entertainment industry. It's like I talked about earlier. It could be any number of industries, including, I know that cell and gene therapy is a big industry, that's a growth industry that's coming along. And so we want to make sure that we have plenty of industries here that are attracting folk that are interested in this, that are growing and hiring more individuals. I used to visit Austin, Texas a lot. Dell Computers is based down there. And to one of the points earlier, they talked about how that economy grew so much from Dell Computers being there because people who moved up in the company jumped off and started their own companies, and they were making enough money to start their own ventures, and that grew the whole atmosphere down there and the whole landscape to where they have a pretty robust economic industry in regards to computer science. And so also we'd like to see an increase, undo the increase in the suburban wage tax and parking tax. Right now, we're trying to attract people to the city. It's important that happens. We got to make sure that people are not priced out of coming to the city. The parking tax, I know that there has been a deal on the table that was brokered by a couple of council members and making that happen. And so we'd like to see that reduced. And then, of course, wage and business tax reductions. We're talking about 1% of the general fund revenues to annual schedule of wage and BERT reduction, 70% devoted to wage tax reduction, 30% to reducing net income portion of the BERT. And that really totals to, I should say, $302 million in investments that talk about doing both equity investments and growth investments. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, we have a rare opportunity with the American Rescue Plan. We know we're getting this one-time infusion over the next couple of years. This is not an either-or moment, but an as-well-as moment. Not an either-or. And in the past, I've been in part of a lot of either-or moments, but this is truly an as-well-as moment. Philadelphia can invest in reducing the root causes of inequity as well as promoting inclusive growth going forward. Philadelphia can help retrain people for the jobs of today, as well as ensure they have jobs to go to thereafter. And Philadelphia can bolster Black and brown businesses while ensuring, as well as growing a consumer base of businesses and residents with whom for them to do business with. So we know that inclusive growth is very important. Equity is very important. And so we want to make sure that everybody is a part of taking advantage of this one-time investment moving forward for the city of Philadelphia to grow. And with that, I'll open it up to questions and to either myself or the expert SALT committee who are very versed in all of this.
Before we go to questions, let me continue with the panel, then we can have questions for everybody else. So let's go to Zach Wilcher from the Independence Business Alliance.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, council persons, and thank you for having me today to testify on behalf of the Independence Business Alliance Greater Philadelphia's LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce. My name is Zach Wilke. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm executive director of the organization. The IBA is a membership-based organization dedicated to providing opportunities, access, and resources to LGBTQ plus businesses and employees. We serve more than 850 professionals across 325 member businesses. As we talk about the potential transformative power of the American Rescue Plan Act, I want to again thank the City of Philadelphia and the Commerce Department especially for so quickly responding to the crisis at hand with a program of loans and grants that benefited many of our small business enterprises. The fast-acting city officials provided economic leadership that was not coming at a federal level a year ago, and I'm grateful for their efforts. When talking to my LGBTQ plus chamber leader peers in cities across the country, many of them look to Philadelphia as a model in rapid response. Though the program could not possibly meet the great demand of the business community that was needed, its effects surely mitigated what could have been a larger disaster. So many people on this panel today spoke passionately about their communities and their opportunities and challenges, especially in panel 4. As executive director of the IBA, I work on the needs of our constituents at the intersection of LGBTQ plus and business communities. So today I'll filter my contributions to today's conversation through that lens. But I want to stipulate and stress that LGBTQ plus folks are a vertical that run through every other community and is applied to anything I talk about today. Queer people who intersect with other minor communities have had a much harder time through this crisis than their counterparts because of intersectional oppression with classism, racism, ableism, misogyny, and cissexism. The LGBTQ plus community continues to endure through this crisis, but of course, LGBTQ plus folks in BIPOC and trans communities have been adversely affected in much worse ways, both quantitatively and qualitatively. The COVID-19 pandemic and ensuing economic crisis has sent shockwaves through the country, and the American Rescue Plan for cities represents a lifeline and the largest positive fiscal jolt to their budgets in decades. The decisions made in the coming weeks will determine whether cities like Philadelphia merely enjoy a brief stimulus or seed a new trajectory of inclusive economic growth. We believe that elected officials, leveraging their networks of civic, business, philanthropic, and community stakeholders that surround them, should take an approach to use their ARP fund in 3 different ways: to stabilize, to strategize, and to organize. First, to stabilize, local governments like ours must use the resources to stabilize their operating budgets. Many governments, like Philadelphia's, incurred large deficits in 2020 as the economic slowdown hurt tax revenues and local governments assumed pandemic-related costs. To remedy this imbalance, many cities pared back essential services which must again be fortified, such as first responders, sanitation workers, planning personnel, and other government employees who faced hours that were reduced and furloughs. Through my organization's lens, boost to the local economy can help all LGBTQ plus people. To comprehensively address the damaging economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic, any response must integrate the needs of LGBTQ plus people and ensure that these communities are not left behind in recovery efforts. Compared with the general population, LGBTQ people are at greater risk of experiencing economic insecurities due to disproportionate economic hardships, such as higher rates of poverty and unemployment, greater food insecurity, and vulnerability to homelessness and workforce discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. These conditions and disparities predate the pandemic, but they have also been exacerbated by it. A key driver of employment instability and unemployment among LGBTQ plus communities is the prevalence of discrimination when attempting to enter the workforce and maintain employment. 1/3 of LGBTQ plus Americans reported that discrimination moderately or significantly affected their ability to be hired. 1/3 of LGBTQ plus Americans had their work hours reduced during the coronavirus pandemic, and 2/3 of LGBTQ plus households have experienced financial problems during the coronavirus pandemic. The city should consider explicitly including LGBTQ plus identity in their definition of minority-owned businesses in order to increase the access to grants for LGBT-owned small businesses, which are among the many that have struggled throughout this pandemic. Supplier diversity literally keeps businesses alive. LGBTQ plus owned businesses are often small, community-based, and privately owned. The ability to host events and have people gather is a hallmark of queer businesses, and this is important both economically and psychologically. Historically, LGBTQ plus bars have served as a safe space for the often marginalized queer community. LGBTQ plus folks, many of whom have been estranged from their biological families, gather in business establishments with chosen family who accept and understand them. We need continued concentrated support for all minority-owned and disadvantage-owned businesses, which often make all of our communities exactly what they are. The city should also take this historical moment to strategize, thinking of actions that will be immediate, inclusive, and cognizant of future prosperity. Businesses continue to need capital to reopen doors and keep those doors open, and people need outreach and skills development to match them to available jobs. While it's important to consider investments' impact beyond the immediate term, continuing to provide such immediate help is a necessary baseline for longer-term recovery. An important lesson from last year's CARES Act is that moving resources quickly through existing systems can only exacerbate economic and racial inequality. Many minority-owned microbusinesses did not access loans through the federal government's Paycheck Protection Program due to lack of awareness, lack of connectivity, and outright discrimination. We need guards at the local level against this happening again. Local leaders have a chance to invest in future growth and prosperity over the next couple of years, the impacts of which will extend beyond near-term expenditure. To that end, we should be thinking about many things, such as the next crisis. This will clearly not be the last public health crisis that the city faces. How are we now strategizing for COVID-23? And we also should be thinking about the current public health crisis of the opioid crisis. We need to innovate for businesses in our commercial corridors, which have been decimated, and beyond, thinking about ways to open streets and having eating outdoors and provide direct aid to hospitality. We need to invest in ending the epidemic of gun violence. We need renewed commitment to his hospitality spaces. Specifically, so many LGBTQ+ owned businesses are in the hospitality and event space, and in our own neighborhood, they need gatherings to make a living. In the world of COVID-19, however, large gatherings have been strictly but sensibly prohibited at usually animated restaurants and bars for more than a year as Philadelphia digs its way out of a pandemic shutdown. Even with the miracle of vaccines, we anticipate the pandemic could change the way that the LGBTQ+ community socializes for quite some time. For some folks, these are the only places where people can authentically be who they are. We need to continue to reimagine ways to end housing instability, homelessness, and food deserts, all while understanding the historic inequities that made these things happen. We applaud the new innovative law around evictions, which keeps people in their homes as the city mitigates landlord relations. And public transportation is something we should be concentrating on as well. What an exciting moment this is to focus on how we move people safely and effectively throughout the city, including those who don't have or don't want cars. Finally, the city should take this moment to organize by setting up councils that are able to take the city into an innovative, inclusive future fueled by momentum by the ARP. These councils should be public-private partnerships that include small businesses, neighborhood leaders, social services agencies, philanthropic leaders, corporate heads, and specifically and intentionally minority business chambers like mine, along with the African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American chambers of commerce, who have been speaking with a unified voice throughout the pandemic. These groups would be tasked with aggregating and supplementing existing recovery plans, setting goals, recommending investments, and tracking results from on the ground. They can identify and pursue relevant opportunities in many other parts of the deployment of funds, such as for education, transit, small business, especially restaurants, and affordable housing. In closing, in addition to the public health crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic has further jeopardized the ability of LGBTQ+ people and countless other Philadelphians to secure the resources they need to stay afloat, exacerbating existing changes for these individuals to achieve labor and economic security, as well as stable housing. Indeed, the pandemic has amplified systemic inequalities, particularly for LGBTQ folks who are Black, Latinx, women, trans, or low income. Policymakers across all levels of Philadelphia government have an obligation to implement targeted strategies that address the needs of those who are most vulnerable, including LGBTQ+ people, their families, and their communities. It is vital that these individuals are not left behind. I want to make clear that we are committed to working with the City of Philadelphia on solutions that will steady Philadelphia on the road to recovery and bring us back to a space of innovation. We are happy to partner in any way to aid your work in helping our businesses survive, and I'm happy to answer any questions about our community that the City Council has today. Thank you again for having us here.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you to the Independent Business Alliance for the testimony today. And our last testimony, but not least, is going to be from Eric Diaz from the Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Eric, please state your name for the record and please proceed.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Dom, for calling this hearing. Council for listening, and everyone here for participating in what has at times been a very robust discussion about certainly a crucial topic at a incredible juncture in our city's history. As Chairman said, I'm Eric Diaz, and I'm testifying today as a board member of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. As probably most of you know, for the past 3 decades, the Hispanic Chamber has been the leading voice advocating for Hispanic businesses in the Greater Philadelphia region, promoting and encouraging the development and advancement of economic growth in the Hispanic community. I'll hit on some of the themes previously mentioned today, focusing on what our people need now. The city's long-term prosperity, equity and equitable impact have been hit hard several times, effectiveness, priorities, and I'll be echoing and hopefully amplifying several comments made with respect to Black and brown small businesses. Including the excluded as we build back Philadelphia's economy better must become the top priority of both the private and public sector. The Hispanic community, for one, has long been a community of have-nots, too far outside the sphere of economic prosperity to even look in. COVID's disproportionate impact on communities of color in general, and the Hispanic community in particular, has made painfully obvious the desperate need for equitable access to information and capital. At the Hispanic Chamber, we see firsthand how entrepreneurship can strengthen and uplift families, how small business owners and the businesses they run provide pockets of prosperity in neighborhoods plagued with poverty, and how small businesses, supported with information and capital, grow and hire and serve as the economic backbone of our city. Accordingly, we respectfully but emphatically and urgently request that you prioritize support for Hispanic small business owners and entrepreneurs as you plan the allocation of funds from the American Rescue Act. We encourage City Council and Mayor Kenny's administration to seize the opportunity to both balance the budget and invest in the growth of Philadelphia's economy by supporting Hispanic businesses. Investments deployed through the existing local entrepreneurship ecosystem with the goal of increasing the size and number of Hispanic businesses will catalyze new jobs, a broader tax base, and wealth creation to achieve poverty elimination in Philadelphia. Imagine that. Your approach should be focused, we dare say. For example, the city could invest in scaling up Hispanic small businesses in key industries where they concentrate, such as grocery, childcare, retail, and restaurants. Supporting Hispanic startups where they are underrepresented in high-wage and high-growth industries such as technology and construction would open doors to new worlds of opportunity for this community. Investment focused on long-neglected commercial corridors would signal a resolve to respect the human dignity of residents, reinvigorate the fight against blight, spark revitalization, and restore hope. Your approach should be practical, of course. Consumer-facing businesses in the Hispanic community, for example, tend to operate on thin margins and face fierce competition in highly regulated environments with inadequate access to information and capital. They are precariously positioned economically, and as such, they are more vulnerable to disruptions. The pandemic, as we all know, has been devastating. We all also know, however, that with the appropriate resources and tools, Hispanic small businesses could build stronger foundations, increasing stability and resiliency. The city could invest in the infrastructure of Hispanic small businesses by providing the access to information and capital needed to own rather than rent, to invest in technology that increases efficiency and reach, to get finance ready, expand, and achieve economies of scale. Entrepreneurs, as we all know, need access to affordable, high-quality professional services, flexible sources of capital, and curated education that meets their specific needs. The city could invest in programs and services that meets our diverse community of entrepreneurs where they are. The Hispanic Chamber will, of course, continue to support the Hispanic community through the end of this pandemic, which has decimated so many Hispanic businesses and families, both financially and personally. As our society and economy recover from COVID, we will position our business owners to grab that rebound and rise up stronger than before. They will require access to information and capital, though, to succeed.
This time, though, the resources are available in the form of American Rescue Act funds. Understanding that you all have many mouths to feed at City Council, it's a big city, and difficult choices to make, we implore Council and this administration to embrace this moment with vision. Hispanic small business owners are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the entire country. We start up businesses at an exponentially faster rate than any other group, and all of this against the headwind of long-standing systemic racism. Imagine if we rewarded the work ethic and the entrepreneurial drive of the thousands of Hispanic small business owners in Philly with equal access, just equal access to capital and information. Imagine what it would look like if this City Council and this administration seized this opportunity to extend a helping hand, not a handout, a helping hand, to lift up those clamoring to get out of the hole that they were pushed into. It would look like new jobs. It would look like a broader tax base. It would look like wealth creation to achieve poverty elimination for greater Philadelphia. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for today's hearing about this crucial topic. I and the leaders, staff, and members and board and committee members of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce all stand ready, willing, and able, eager to work with you all to build a stronger and safer Philadelphia for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for that testimony also. I have one question I'm going to ask, I guess, the chamber, or maybe it's Paul or anyone else. And that is, I think it was Harold Epps who said to me a few years ago, our former commerce director, that he calculated that between 58 and 60% of the revenue of the city of Philadelphia was generated in a 10-block radius from 18th to Walnut. With that as a backdrop, can someone give me a perspective on the importance or maybe the reliance the Philadelphia government has on that center city economy, and how has it fared through the pandemic? And what will it take to bring it back to pre-pandemic levels?
Alan, let me try to address that in two ways. We could talk about the great positive, which is that between Center City and University City, 53% of all jobs in Philadelphia are concentrated at the center of the transit system. That's a system that brings people in from across the entire city. The flip side of that is what everybody else has been talking about, is the absence of jobs so many other places in this city. And so our strength is a reflection of the fact that we do not have dynamic job growth elsewhere in the city. I think quite simply, it's at the center of the transit system. 25% of the working residents of every neighborhood in the city are working downtown. They're working in University City. It's those larger firms that create the supply chains that can then purchase from small and emerging businesses across the city. But as I think, as Will said in his testimony, we're at this very unique moment where we can invest in Black and brown businesses, we can invest in disadvantaged businesses, but we can grow the economy of the city as a whole. We don't get this moment too often. And so I think what, clearly, we work very closely with Bruce Katz on his recommendations. As I said, multiple groups came together here to say, let's invest in economic development, let's invest in neighborhood commercial corridors, let's invest in reducing gun violence, but also create a setting where businesses of all kinds can grow. So it's a great strength we have in Center City. It's at risk if suburban residents choose not to come back or other workers can't get there, but we need a commitment for job growth citywide. That's what the opportunity is at this moment.
Okay. Well, thank you. I want to thank this panel for your testimony today. Really appreciate it. In the spirit of time, we are going to move to public testimony. But this is, of course, just the start of a conversation. And again, I thank you all for being here today and hanging in there. It's almost 4 hours, I think. So,
Alan, why aren't you providing dinner to all of us? I was expecting someone to knock at my door at this moment, right?
Yeah, Paul, that's a shame.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So I want to understand we have witnesses from the public today. And before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify or who is providing public comment should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you're consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. I ask that public witnesses begin their testimony now, and please be sure to state your name for the record before you proceed. And we have our first testifier from the public.
Hello? Hello?
Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Linda Caldwell Smith.
Okay. Please feel free to give your testimony.
All right. My name is Linda Caldwell Smith. I am the interim co-chair of the Friends of the Free Library of Philadelphia. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on resolution number 210269. The Friends of the Free Library is an independent, nonprofit organization composed of local groups at all of the Free Library's 54 neighborhood branches. We support and advocate for the library system as a whole and for the necessary programming, staffing, and materials at our branches. We work to ensure that our communities have access to the information and resources they need and deserve through their local libraries. We are our community's voice in the library system. Now, I've heard a lot of really good testimony and ideas today. Truly, the American Rescue Plan will allow City Council and Mayor Kenny to engage in some bold new thinking to address our city's problems as the post-COVID recovery continues. We have a real opportunity to create positive changes to address our city's high poverty rate, joblessness, and other issues. But I would remind the committee that the Free Library of Philadelphia could be a powerful agent for this change because we're in every neighborhood. But we need help. Due to the pandemic, the Free Library lost over 200 jobs and almost $15 million in city funding. All branches were closed for months and we're partially reopened now, and we have a robust digital program. But it's time to get back to in-person business. Summer is coming. Traditionally, this is our busiest time with children and families looking for safe, free literacy activities and programs. Now, my friends groups are preparing for this, but we need to have all our branches open with safe, functional buildings, up-to-date working equipment for staff and patrons, the latest materials, and we need to be fully staffed. I urge the committee to keep the Free Library of Philadelphia in the forefront of its funding considerations. Let's invest in our libraries and our communities. The Friends of the Free Library stand ready to assist in this effort. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for hanging in there. It's been a long hearing, so thank you very much, and we understand what your request. I think there's another person from the public that wanted to testify today. Yes, hi, my name is Jeanette Cuevas. Okay, please proceed with your testimony. Good evening, council members. Buenas tardes. My name is Jeanette Cuevas, and I am a co-op developer with the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance, or PACA for short. I understand we are talking about how to use the $1.4 billion fund that Philadelphia is scheduled to receive as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, which is intended to help our city and economy recover from a monumental year in our collective history. We have a unique opportunity, as Council Member Dome states in his resolution, to make significant investments in programs and policies that set Philadelphia on a new trajectory to grow family-sustaining jobs at a faster rate, reduce and combat entrenched systemic poverty, and develop new and innovative methods for performing city services. With this in mind, I am here today to urge Philadelphia's elected leaders to make such an investment through our local cooperative economy. Cooperatives, or co-ops, are jointly owned, democratically controlled enterprises that exist across sectors and industries. By providing technical assistance, PACA supports working class, Black, Indigenous, and people of color and immigrant communities who are using cooperatives as a tool toward racial and economic justice. There are numerous reasons this tool is so powerful. First, research shows that worker cooperatives provide higher quality jobs with better wages than traditionally structured counterparts. This is especially important in industries characterized by inconsistent worker wages, such as childcare, media production, food service, and birth work. Secondly, cooperative structures can help preserve existing businesses. As we face the silver tsunami, an aging population of business owners, one strategy for business preservation is to support owners in selling their businesses to their workers. Another business preservation strategy is the creation of purchasing and shared services co-ops, which help member businesses lower their costs. For example, I've worked with bodegueros, corner store owners, on exploring a purchasing cooperative to improve the sustainability of their individual corner stores. This will help these immigrant businesses stay afloat and build community and shared power among folks who were previously isolated and competing for resources. Finally, we know it is no secret to anyone that Philly desperately needs more affordable housing. We know that building housing cooperatives on community land trusts is a powerful way to ensure permanent affordability, which is why we are currently working with a West Philadelphia housing co-op to support their expansion. We at PACA can speak to the increased interest in cooperative economics since the pandemic hit. More people are seeing how co-ops are necessary in Philadelphia to build a resilient and equitable economy in which people have agency and wealth is built and shared within the community. What we need is a deep investment in cooperative development and technical assistance to match that growing demand. I urge Philadelphia's elected leaders to make that investment, and thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you very much. And I believe this concludes the hearing on Resolution 210269. And the hearing is adjourned. I want to thank everybody for their attendance, and especially want to thank my Vice Chair, Councilman Member Brian O'Neill. And we appreciate everyone being here. So thank you very much. Be safe out there. Have a good evening. Thank you.